That amp's sounding pretty healthy. Happy Saturday to everyone. I hope everyone's doing all right. Let me mute the guitar mic. Turn off this gate on my voice so we don't have any weird interruptions. Had to take the pick guard off that thing to fish the volume pot for the bridge pickup out. It had an issue. One strand of shielding was touching something it should not, but it's so hard to see inside one of those, even with a dental mirror. The pick guard will probably go back on at some point because I'm just such a sucker for the rear cover of Revolver. But right now, the pick guard is off. It's in pepper mode, hence the choice. Good afternoon, everyone. Believe it or not, that was the 72 Deluxe Reverb with that Weber Blue Dog 50 watt with a Zen Drive that I rolled and tweaked a little bit. And it was just loud enough to get that feedback, but not so loud that you go deaf, which is an important consideration in a room this size. All right, let me get to some of your questions because I figure that's why you're here, not to hear me play cowboy chords and pat myself on the back for them. Again, before I get started, please only ask questions once. Please put question marks before your questions. And the questions that were asked and that were already in the chat before the start of the stream, they don't appear to me in the order that they were asked. I will get to them anyway. And then at some point, probably in the first 5-10 minutes, we'll be caught up and everything will be in the order they came in. So the first question I see here at the top is from Gitbox. He's got a Super Reverb. All original parts, but the vibrato knob has a dome center. All others are concave. That is not an original knob. That's odd. I've never seen one with a dome center. But if it's a 1965, not a reissue, the telltale is the 8s on the knobs. The 65 knobs should have snowman 8s, where you have a small circle on top of a large circle, a very distinct 8 on a snowman. If that knob does not have the Snowman 8, it is not the original knob. If it has a Snowman 8 but has a domed center, it may be a repaired original that someone took a dome on. I've never seen that before. I wouldn't worry about it. As long as it works, it works. Hey, Federico, do I by chance have a technical opinion on the Fryette Power Station? Well, by more than chance, I've had one in. It's a really well-designed device. It's a great circuit, really, really well built, and it does what it says on the tin. The only consideration is much like that Etsy site guy discovered. 100-watt amp, if it says it's a 100-watt amp, that's its clean rating. And it will put out more than that. Most Marshall 100-watt heads will put out about 120 watts. This 22-watt Deluxe Reverb puts out about 30 to 32 watts. An AC30 puts out about 40 watts at peak. So if you have the Fryette and it is rated for a 100-watt amp, and you're running your 100-watt amp into it, you may run into some things. Contact Steve. He probably built in some headroom, just because most guitarists don't know about RMS and how the wattage on an amp is measured. But also know that as Etsy Psych, the German guy with the bad wardrobe, discovered, running a dimed 100-watt amp all the way dimed, which you can get away with a load box or an attenuator or the power station, is really hard on the amp. And if you had a tube that was not healthy, you will find out. If you had a screen resistor that was on the verge, you will find out. Hey, Eckhard Kraus, what are my thoughts on running a twin reverb reissue with two JJ6V6S's, which can handle the 500 volt plates, and a speaker load of 16 ohms, as shown on Rob Robinette's website? It's going to be fine. You're going to be fine. Things will hold up. You may have to make sure the amp is biased for that, because you're going to have a different B plus with only 2 power tubes drawing current compared to 4. So you need to make sure that you have the bias set accordingly. The other thing to be concerned about is what is the heater voltage going to be, because the heater voltage of an amp is not regulated. So if you're expecting to have 6.3 volts, well, that was figured by this power transformer is capable of providing this much current at this much voltage. And with 4 6L6s and the 6 preamp tubes, that's going to have one amount of current being drawn. It's going to bring it down to 6.3. If you only have 2 6V6s instead of 4 6L6s, that current's not going to come down to 6.3. If it's like 6.7, you're fine. If it's like 6.9, your tubes aren't going to like that. So I would suggest, just if it's too loud for you and you need to get preamp, the sound of the preamp overdriving, you can do what I just did here. We use an overdrive pedal into in this case, a deluxe on 2.5, or you can install a master volume and use the 6L6s and have all the heaters and the bias and the B plus as Leo intended. But it is safe as long as you take into account all those other parameters. AAM Design, he's got a Car Rambler, nice amp, that sounds swampy and distorted when using the tremolo only on the low notes. At the same settings, upper notes are clear as a bell, changed all tubes, same. Well, first contact Steve Carr, because he will take care of you. Second of all, it's probably a bias issue. I don't remember if the Rambler is cathode or fixed bias. It's been a while since I had one in. It probably cathode biased, but contact Steve Carr and tell him those same symptoms, and if he's he'll step you through it. He's going to know that amp really, really well. If I had one here, I could say, oh, this is why, but it's probably related to bias. It could be something else. It could be a coupling cap or something, but it's rarely going to be that. Hey, Matt Johnson, I am feeling much better this week. I should sound a little bit better, I think. How do amp techs generally decide on their bench rate? Is it set by Music Store if you work out of one, or set by competing tech rates? Well, it's set competitively, depending on what market you're in. I'm expensive for Memphis. I am cheap for New York or LA or Chicago. I don't have the overhead costs that they have in those other cities. You set what the market will bear, which you think is a fair rate, and you, I'll get back to you, AAM Design, about you contacted Steve. And either people pay your rates or they don't. If they don't pay your rates, you need to lower them. I charge currently $80 an hour after the first 2 hours. The first 2 hours is a set $150. It's my bench fee. So if it takes me 10 minutes or 2 hours to fix your amp, I get $150 because I never know what I'm going to find. And I don't know how hazardous the amp is. And every time I go into an amplifier, I'm doing something dangerous using specialized knowledge. So I feel justified in saying $150 buys you 2 hours, whether it takes me 5 minutes or 1 hour and 59 minutes. Beyond that, I charge $80 an hour, which can be expensive for some, but compared to LA and New York rates, that's really cheap. There are always guys who will charge much less than I do. And, not that I'm the end-all, be-all, but I see that kind of work come in all the time. Buy once, cry once. Hey, the Main Street Exiles are doing a recap of 57 Twin, or the reissue. Can't get the original solder joints to flow using a Hakko iron set to 850, fresh tip using flux. What do I do? 850 should be a bit high to work on the reissue series fenders, because they're going to be using lead-free typically. I don't add flux to it. I use I would set my iron to 700, 750 tops. I use a small chisel tip, a 2.4 millimeter chisel, and I would add some fresh leaded solder to the old joints, and then remove the old stuff with braid, and that usually makes it work. Then I get all the old solder off before I put fresh solder on, because you can't mix the leaded and the non-leaded solder. But that should do the job. And see my other videos I've described on reissue fenders where I don't pull the component up through the board from the top. I will cut the two leads where it joins the body of the capacitor or the resistor, and then bring those leads vertical, heat up the solder beneath, and then push them down. So that little that little hook that's on the bottom doesn't get pulled through the traces and the pads. Hey, Thomas A. Carlos, I want to like TAD power tubes. For a while I did, and I had started having lots and lots of problems with TAD power tubes. So it's going to depend on the tube type. Currently on the market for EL34s, there are quite a few good ones, from JJ to Tungsol to Electro-Harmonix to Mullard reissues. Sovtex are fine. For 6L6s, I really prefer the Tungsol 6L6 GC SDRs. And for 6 V6s, currently I'm liking the Electro-Harmonix. Hey, John Ram. 66 Vibrolux sounded insane with crazy gain and aggressive tone. Found an 8.2K, not 820 ohm. And negative feedback swapped and sounds normal, but with 800, it just didn't sound like negative feedback bypass. It was wilder. What's going on? I don't know what was going on. It's possible that resistor was faulty. The 8.2K was faulty, though I can't imagine why it would be. I can't pretend to know everything, but normally that 8.2K is high enough that you're just not going to hear much negative feedback at all. It's possible that it was a lead dress thing where the negative feedback wire was in proximity to something, and then when you made those changes, it got moved. I don't know. I wish I'd had your amp on the bench. That would have been an interesting one to discover the cause of, but I don't think I can speculate. I want to get back real fast to AAM Design, because he contacted Steve, no answer beyond above. Looking to see what above was. Maybe it's just the question I tried to answer. If you're getting distortion in the low frequencies but not the high frequencies, that's pretty darn sure that car, the Rambler uses, even if I don't remember, I think it's cathode bias, but it's going to have a bias tremolo circuit. Putting aside the fact that it's a car Rambler, if someone were to say, how do I clean up the output section of a cathode bias or fixed bias amp with a cathode bias setup, not bias, cathode tremolo, vibrato, I would suggest lowering the output coupling caps, like if they're 100 nanofarad or 47 nanofarad or 22 nanofarad, try lowering them down to 10 nanofarad. That should still have plenty of low end, but not much or any mud. It also changes the arrival time of things, but that's beyond the scope of this. And then make sure the bias is set to the cleaner side. But I would have to have the amp on the bench to give you more than that. I'm sorry. Hey, Bill Avanda. Okay, we've got 3 questions. Let's see. Car amplifiers are very good. I've only tried about 5, the Mercury and the Rambler and a few others, and they're all built very similarly. They do different things, different volumes. I think they're very good amps. I think that he invested in silicone spooge, but they're good amps. I'm not a big fan of how he does the reverb driver on his models with reverb. He uses the 70s Fender circuit with like a 620 or 480 ohm resistor without a bypass. I've had that fail in cars, and I changed it out to the standard 60s Fender driver with a 2.2K bypass by a 22 or 25 microfarad. Other than that, they've been really good amps. Extension cabinet for a Princeton, what speaker would I recommend? It depends on the extension cabinet size. I would want a fairly large cabinet with a 12-inch speaker, and then it depends on what your idea of a clean Fender should sound like. I tell people in general, because people have to listen to recorded examples, listen to Robin Ford Thin Blue Line record. Are those the clean sounds you're looking for? Now listen to Stevie Ray Vaughan, Riviera Paradise, or Lenny. Are those the clean sounds you're going for? There's overlap, but those are kind of the two camps of like the warmer Robin Ford kind of thing, or the more crystalline Stevie thing. And then, ET65, G12C. And, in the ET65, that's the Creamback 65. That's the Alessandro. G12C, that can also be a couple Jensen speakers. That could be great big JBLs, But and one of my thoughts on neodymium speakers, some of them really suck. I like the Creamback, the Neo. The Neo Creamback is good. It's brighter than a real Creamback, but it's a good sound. The Neo C12K sounds an awful lot like the regular C12K, which means that it sucks. It just weighs less while sucking. Let's see. Flaconcius, he's repairing a Marshall DSL 40C. R83, the one which is 4.7K and feeds the high voltage to the 412X7s, is getting hot. So I assume that's the screen resistor. Is that a screen resistor, or is that taking the place of a choke? I guess I have to see this schematic in front of me. If you got just over half a watt going through it, it should be fine. It's going to depend on the resistor that you have. You can barely hold your fingertip to it with a 3 watt. If it's a metal oxide or wire wound resistor and it has airflow, it's probably going to be fine even if it gets hotter than you can touch. Remember, those things have a rating. Look at the rating of the resistor, and like the little Vishays I use have a rating of like 200 something Celsius at 700 volts drop. That's an operating condition that you're never going to find in an amp unless it's already in a house fire. So just because we, who are not rated to 105 degrees or even higher Celsius, we'd be miserable at 85 degrees Celsius. Ask the Australians here. Just because it hurts us doesn't mean it will hurt a resistor. But if it makes you feel better, make sure it has lots of airflow around it, and you can go to a 5 watt. You can get a little low mass 5 watt that'll fit in places 3 watts often will. Let's see. Hey, Joe Bucci. Yeah, the 600 volt caps aren't made anymore. If in the rare instance where I have an amp which used to have a single filter cap where the unloaded B plus does exceed 500 volts, I'll change that to a series. I'll use 2 350 volt caps to make a series connection that can handle 700 volts. Or you can also use 2 300 volts, but it's going to be easier to find a 350 volt rated cap typically, or 400 volts. Thank you, Goody Guitars. Appreciate that. Hello, Bambule. Hey, Living Student. Wes Chilton, everyone. If I don't say you by name, does not mean I'm not glad to see you. It's just I want to get as many questions as possible while not doing the roll call. Thank you, Andy Kulikowski. Let's see. Mark Harkin's music. Okay, sorry, I just missed the top part. I'm not singling Mark out. This is why the question marks in front of a question help me see your questions, because I didn't see Mark's initial question. Bought a new Vendor Deluxe Reverb 68 reissue Silverface, had about 1 year. I've played it for about 40. Play it for about 45 minutes. I get a loud roaring rumble sound. I've turned it off for about 2 minutes, turn it back on, then it stops. A loud roaring rumble. If I've played it for about 45 minutes, it starts to make that sound, and you turn it off for about 2 minutes, then it stops. That sounds like you might have most likely one of the tubes is beginning to cherry plate. One of the 6v6s is bad, and I bet if you were to look at the back of the amp when you're hearing that sound, one of those tubes is going red. And then you cool it off by turning it off, and it takes a while to build up to that point where it's actually drawing that much current again. So you probably need either a new pair of 6v6s, or you need to have someone look at the screen grid resistor on the board, maybe move that to the octal socket, or possibly both. But it sounds like one of the tubes are not well matched. One of them is drawing too much current. It takes a while to get to the point where that becomes a problem. But from what you're saying, that's what that sounds like. Thank you, Christopher Westland. I appreciate that very much. Is there any component mods to trim a little bass in a JTM 45? 1217 Productions asks. I love the way they sound, but some I've played could have a lot of bass even with it rolled off. Yeah, if you look at the videos I have up on the Germino, I show some basic things you can do in a Germino, which will tame that, or not really roll off lows, but add a little bit more of the upper stuff. But beyond just little tweaks, like you'll see in those videos on the Germinos, beyond little basic tweaks, you may find that the JTM 45 is not the amp for you, and that you really would prefer to have a 1987. Start with whatever amp you choose. Start closer to the finish line. The closer to the amp that you have is to where you want to be, the less difficult it is to get there. If you have this amp, but you really want it to be like this, that's probably some other amp is already closer to that point. But look at those Germino videos I have up on revoicing the classic JTM 45. And if that doesn't answer your question fully, come back next week or the next live stream and we'll talk about it. Hey, Brad, thanks for making it here. Thanks, EMAC-J. That is at Casino, Chinese Casino with Freylands, and all changed out electronics and hardware. I've got videos up on that. Into a copy of a Zen Drive that I made that has a little tweaks because I don't like the stock Zen Drive. Going into that 72 Deluxe Reverb that came in. I've worked on that amp so many times over the years. It kept blowing the same 6v6 and having too much heat on the same screen grid resistor. And I've changed out the resistor and changed the tubes multiple times. This time I have changed the tube sockets. It has now been on for 3 days and I've had no issues whatsoever. And I've played it at pretty much at gig volumes, not there just now, but yeah. But I have noticed as it's been on for 3 days, the noise floor is a little bit higher than I would like. So I'm about to open it back up and see what little last bits I can get. I just want it to be rock solid for the owner after all the problems he had. But the old tube sockets, you can develop arcing, even if you can't measure resistance when it's cold. When it gets hot enough, like third set, sometimes you can have that be an issue. And so I just saw Brad's comment. He's never blown a 6L6. He assumes it might burn his lips. He's such a liar. So fuck those old sockets. He's got new tube sockets. Just the octals. Let's see. Where was I? Hey, Don Spencer, doing ribs today. We get biscuits. Savory or sweet? What's the Memphis style? For biscuits, savory. Or plain. The only flavor should have in biscuit. Only ingredients in biscuits should be butter, or lard, or Crisco, water, flour, and salt. And you can add sweet to that. You can put a biscuit. You can put a piece of sausage on there, bits, whatever, if you want it savory. But the biscuit should be kind of neutral. A little bit of salt because it needs it. If you're asking about the biscuit style from Memphis style ribs, slow cooked with a dry rub, sauce served at the end, not put on the rib. Hey, Magoo, AC15C1 reverb tank for the upgrade. Thank you. Well, let me see if I can find that one for you. Just 1 second. Because I don't remember the model number. That's one of the 8E series, and I can never remember the model number on that. Just a second. And I'll do it tubesandmore.com, which will be something you guys can access. All right, reverb tanks. And of their choices, we want mod, M-O-D, and we want long. The stock one may not be long, but we want the long. Decay time, we want medium decay. And let's see, on the 8E or 4E. Let's see. I think this is the one. Yeah, this one right here. All right, so let me screen share this for you guys. Now, actually, I'll just put a link. I'll just put a link to this down there. I'll need to screen share this. Let's see if I can get this to work. Just a second. Hit the wrong button. All right. Reverb tank for an AC15C1 or AC30C1. That's the one to get. So it just appeared down at the current point in the chat, even though we are not there. But that's from tubesandmore.com, which is the same thing as CE Distribution, which is one of the places that I get my parts. PD asks, when I play a baritone guitar tuned down to C through a Vibralex clone, it cuts out or I get buzzing on top of the note if I lay into the low notes, low strings. This is tube rectification. Should I look more? That's not the tube rectification doing that. Something's not very happy. Maybe your speaker, maybe your output tubes. Could be a lot of things in the circuit, but I would not think it's tube rectification. It's going to be something. The first thing you need to do is see if the sound is still there when you're playing into a different cab and speaker, because it may be that speaker just does not like such a low frequency. You got to have everything very healthy, especially in a Vibralex clone, where those have little 10-inch speakers. The lower the note is, the more excursion the speaker needs to be able to have to handle that low note. And if the speaker needs to move this much to get that frequency, but it can only move this much, you're going to get that kind of thing. And the sound that's not being produced properly has overtones. You'll hear those overtones go really unpleasant. So. And I scrolled too far down. Sorry. Going back up to where I thought I was, because when I put the link, it scrolled me all the way down. All right, here we are. That's the J1045 bass question. Ribs. Okay, after Magoo. Mitch the Metalhead. All right, sorry to get out of sync. Oh my God, the Coffee Fairy's here. What's your name? My name's Lyle. My wife rocks. All right, see. Mitch the Metalhead. After watching one of your videos where you discuss the importance of tightening screws and nuts on the amplifier annually, do I have to discharge the amp before doing so? I believe if there's a video or 3 videos I did on what Fender owners can do to maintain their amps, and the first thing I show is how to safely discharge the amp before doing so. In general, you probably don't need to, because you won't be going inside the chassis to do anything. You'll be working on the front and rear panels and stuff, but it certainly doesn't hurt. So Brad or Wes or any of my mods who are here who can put links in the description, could you find that video I have? It's in Fender Reissues playlist, and it's things that owners can do to take care of their own Fender Reissue amps, and that'll have that. If one of you guys could pop that in there for me, I appreciate that. I need an assistant producer here besides the Coffee Fairy. I really appreciate her doing that. She's a full professor. She's very accomplished. She's a very bright woman, but the fact that she will do that for me is very, very much appreciated. Hey, Goody Guitars, 1965 jazz bass knockoff, probably Teisco. Big pots but dirty. Any advantage to keeping the old pots? No. Pots are mechanical things. Brad, you don't have to get out of bed for us. You just stay in bed, man. Just don't. I don't want to know what you're doing your phone in bed. The pots are mechanical things. They're rated for X number of rotations in their life, and the contacts get dirty and the contacts wear out. Take them out, put them in a Ziploc bag. If you ever sell the bass to some fiend collector who wants to have all the original Teisco garbage things, there they are. They're in a Ziploc bag. Put some CTS or Burns in there and make some music if it's capable of it. Hey, Martin, given the high price of valves, is it worth sacrificing a little tone and running them a little cooler to give them a little extra life? I think so. I think way too much is made of over-biasing and most of the forums are going to say 70%. Most of the amps I have here, the Fenders I do 50 to 55% typically, unless it's an older one that needs to be pushed to a certain limit to get a certain thing. A lot of the old Fenders were biased in the 40s from the factory, with 110 volts coming out of the wall. It might have been 47%. That's where the factory was designing it to pretty much run. A lot of great sounds done with that. I mean, people on the one hand will tell you how you need to bias everything so hot, and then they say, and you really need to get a Mesa and learn how to dial it in. And a Mesa might have a idle dissipation of 15 to 20%. So very conflicting advice on most of the forums. That's one of the many reasons I don't go there. Hey, Fred Costin, he put an 8-inch warehouse ceramic in his 79 Vibro-Champ. Man, what a difference. Yeah, 8-inch speakers are not great things, but there are certain ones, and the WGS G8C is certainly one of them that just makes it a much, much more responsive amp. Hey, Progress Pedals, thanks for being here. I appreciate that. I'm at the bench now, moving my DIY 5F6A from a 2x10 to a 1x12 cab, deleting bright caps an option, or bumping up Rob ice pick caps in negative feedback. I don't like the negative feedback cap thing. I don't think it's necessary in a 5F6A. I've never played a good 5F6A where I found it was ice picky. It's going to depend on the speakers to an extent, but there's not too many bright caps in a 5F6A. Traditionally, you're going to have 100 picofarad on the volume for the bright channel, and then you're going to have two 270K mixed resistors with a 250 picofarad across one of them. That's not bright. Now you might have a later variant where you might have 500 picofarad across the 270K, or you might have a 250 picofarad across the volume pot. But the traditional 100 picofarad and then the 250 picofarad across the 270K, that's just a little bit. And then here's the thing: if you have a small bright cap on the bright channel, it means it's not rolling off the frequencies that much off the bass channel. So if I've got an actual 58 right there, and if I were to plug my 335 into it, I would go into the bright input and get that little bit of boost from that 100 picofarad. If I were going to plug my Telecaster or Stratocaster into that same amp, I'd use the normal input because I don't need that little bit of air. So make sure that all the factors are being considered and that what you have actually matches the schematic. And a funny note on the Tweed Basement schematic, there's a schematic that's published that a lot of clones build, and the first clone to use that schematic was the Marshall JTM45, which is a straight copy of that schematic. That's the first draft of what Fender actually made, and most of the 5F6A Basemans and the company Tweed Twins that left the factory from 58 to 60 actually aren't that schematic. But if you look at the schematic for the 59 reissue LTD Baseman, that's what they were actually putting out in 58, 59, and 60. Fender always kept evolving things past the first published schematic. But a big part of that is going to depend on your speakers, and Also, if you build the schematic instead of what they actually built, which you find in the LTD schematic, it is a brighter sound than what they actually made. Some big changes in the tone stack and stuff. So see what you actually have. Do you actually have what Fender made, or do you have what Marshall was starting from? While installing a new speaker in my amp, Greg G says, he punched a mounting stud through the surround. It's a tiny hole-shaped hole. I'm glad it's a hole-shaped hole. I'd hate to see a hole that wasn't shaped like a hole. Should I glue it? All right, so it's tough. I'd have to see pictures of it. In general, if I have an old Fender baffle and the screw has just fully come out, because they have a special screw that comes from the front of the baffle and it's reverse threaded so that as you tighten from the rear, it's also tightening from the front. But those things are in a chipboard, and they will come out. If one of those fully comes out and is loose, if it's just a little bit loose, I'll go in there with super glue or epoxy. But if it's all the way out and just nothing to grab back into, the fix is a T-nut from either side, with the teeth that go into the wood, and use a machine screw at that point. It depends on how many screws we're talking about. On a baffle that has 8 screws and you lose one, it's fine. You just remove it and just have 7 screws holding the speaker. But if you have one that only has 4 screws and you lose one, then you got to find a fix. The other fix is you can cut all 4 of the screws flush, rotate it, get fresh wood, and then put T-nuts in the fresh wood if it's not a vintage valuable amp. Let's see. Or take the entire baffle to a wood shop and say, hey, it's a piece of masonite with these dimensions. It's basically masonite, press board, particle board, with these dimensions and this cloth stapled to it. Can you make a new one out of plywood and transfer the grill cloth? Or if it's a commonly available amp, you can get a new baffle from Mojitone, either with a new grill cloth, or you can take it to an upholstery shop, have them transfer the old cloth if it's not in bad physical shape. Some grill cloth is a little bit too raggedy. Is there a way of making a solid-state rectifier to sag like a tube one? Yeah. You use current limiting resistors on the HT side before the rectification. And look at the Vox AC30 and 15C schematic. They have a very good implementation of tube emulation using solid-state. It takes a couple of resistors, and sometimes you might want to use some snubber caps. Hey, Otto von Fledermaus, all is very well. What advice for a good, small, good-sounding jazz amp? Princeton Reverb? If you can't do a jazz gig with a Princeton Reverb for traditional jazz sounds, hang it up. I mean, you can get the solid-state Polytone thing if you want, but those things, I'm not sure why they were so popular. They're not that great. I would take a Boss Katana over a Polytone myself, but in terms of a really good-sounding jazz amp, just get a little Princeton Reverb, or the 1939 Gibson EH150 I had on the channel, because those are everywhere, right? The Charlie Christian amp. Let's see. Hey, Rich Dodson, how much variance is considered acceptable when comparing actual voltages to the voltages noted on blackface Fender layouts for the non-power tubes? Some seem to vary pretty much. Well, a couple of things. You have to remember that the wall voltage that they measured that at was 120 volts, and the meters that they were measuring with are not the same as the meters we use today. They were using analog meters, and it gets complicated. I'd say if you're plus minus 20 volts, typically in a Fender schematic, you're in pretty good shape. If you're more than plus minus 20 volts off, something might be amiss. I take it as a suggestion, not a law. But the thing is, you need to look at the schematic and say, all right, well, this B plus node should be 20 volts lower than the preceding B plus node, which should be 30 volts lower than the one before that, or whatever it is. And just make sure that once you adjust, that you're getting the same proportionate drop from stage to stage. I mean, if the B plus on the plates on the schematics shows 400 volts and you're getting 200 volts, you got a big issue. Hey, Brendan Gauntner. I saw Guitarista's recent video recreating Steve Jones' sound with a 70s twin with a Silverface Deluxe Vibra-Luxor Pro. Get me in a similar ballpark. Thanks. Well, I don't think you use any reverbs. So, yeah, of those amps, the Pro would be closest. A Bandmaster would be closer still because it's solid state. But, yeah, I don't think the audience would necessarily know the difference between that sound with the Deluxe, Vibra-Lux, or whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's the entire point of it is it's a fuck you to the big Marshall stacks that were in vogue at the time. But it's a really loud amp. I mean, if I were to, I could get a Sex Pistols sound with one of these pedals in this 73 Deluxe Reaver right now, except I have to turn up a lot more than I want to, and I'm not going to do that. I wouldn't have to use the pedal. I just have to turn the amp up even more. But I'm not actually at. What was the? Oh goddamn! I'm not actually at the Marquee Club. I'm in a small room in my house, and it's too loud to do a punk gig in here. Yeah, I saw Etsy Sykes' response to Steve's video, and they're friends. The whole thing was a friendly thing with clickbait titles to get each channel a lot of views, and that's fine because that's how the sausages are made. But it's good information if you watch the whole thing. Thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. Vetting a form answer about deciphering 120 hertz hum between ripple and grounds. Unplug amp while on. If the hum immediately stops, likely ripple. If it dissipates while caps discharge, likely ground. That's an interesting idea. Yeah, it makes sense to me. I mean, I can't imagine that the ripple would remain once the mains are unplugged. Well, no, actually, no. Because most people don't know the difference between 60 hertz and 120 hertz. So you might still have hum from the heater supply, even with the amp unplugged. No, that's going to stop too. Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. Sorry, I hadn't thought about it this way. That's actually a pretty good test, but it's not a sign of bad grounds. It could be a lot of. That's going to rule out ripple as a cause, but it won't point to ground as what's left. What's left is a few other things, but as a general rule of thumb, that's a quick way to rule out some ripple. Hey, David Ross, he was wondering if I had any insights on whether or not to use a ground plane on a PC board. I would only use a ground plane around sensitive areas of the component of the circuit. I would use them around the first stage to shield out environmental noise at the input, and I might use a ground plane at the input to the phase inverter, because you have it's a very high impedance node and it's very sensitive to noise, and that's issue. The rest of it, I wouldn't find a ground plane necessary or even particularly helpful, because when you have a ground plane, it means you have a narrow gap between your traces and your pads and ground, and means each one of those gaps is a place where you could have arcing, because there's can be significant current and voltage present, and that's when you don't have to have the risk of arcing, don't have the risk of arcing. So I wouldn't have any ground plane anywhere in the power supply, certainly. And I would have very limited uses of ground plane. There are other ways to do it. You can run a ground trace on one side of the board, and, or ground or B plus trace on one side of the board, and a grid connection on the other side of the board, so you have a little bit of capacitance built into the board for that kind of thing. In general, though, the number one rule I would say is never use a ground plane to carry current, to be a path for a signal. So I would never have the grounds in the amp built into a plane or just heat sink to a plane. You're just asking for it. Now you can kind of use a long ground plane as a very wide trace, in which case you can do that, because then it's just a really big trace. But in a traditional ground plane that just goes everywhere, that should be for shielding only and not used as a return path for any currents. So I separate the role of ground in an amp into AC negative, DC negative, and shield. And if you're just using shield, that's where you use the ground plane, just for shielding. And the only two places in most amps where that's going to be any benefit are the input to the phase inverter, the actual input of the amp, and maybe a return around an effects loop, but that's typically going to be the phase inverter input. So I think they're misused an awful lot. Yeah, all right. So people talk about the Steve Fryette's video about measuring the outputs of amps. Yeah, Steve's absolutely correct. Hey, Jacob K. Guitar. Well, You have to look at the whole thing together. It's a 5K pot after a 47K or 100K or 22K negative feedback resistor, depending on which tap you're using, and that sets up a voltage divider. So in a Marshall circuit, you either have a 5K pot or you have a 25K pot in parallel with a 4.7K. So you got about 5K or about 4.5K. One of the things I do play around with is if I have the 25K pot with a parallel resistor, it gets rid of DC. I'll often go to like a 5.6 or 6.8K resistor to get closer to the 5K of the older circuit without the parallel path. Anyway, you have to look at it as, all right, I have X amount of current coming out of the output transformer, and the 4 ohm tap has less current than the 8 ohm tap, which has less current than the 16 ohm tap. So that's why if I'm using the 16 ohm tap, I may use a 100K resistor because I need to reduce it more. 8 ohm, I may only need to use a 47K because I don't need to reduce it as much. And the 4 ohm tap, I only need to use the 27K because I don't need to reduce that even as much as the other one. And then whichever resistor you have and whichever tap they're connected to, they go to a 5K pot to ground, or in the later ones with a parallel pot and resistor, about 4.5K to ground. So they're keeping the pot the constant, they're changing the resistor. You can, if you were to want to have the same effect as increasing the value of that 5K to like a 10K pot, well, that's been doubled. So then you need to you can either double the pot or you could lower the resistor. Is that right? Let's see, 100K, 5K. If you want to, 100K to 5K, 100K. Yeah, you could, instead of going from a 5K and 100K, you go from instead of going to a 10K, changing a pot, you could just keep the 5K and go to the 47K, connect to the 16 ohm tap. That'd be about the same thing, and it's just changing one little inexpensive part. Sorry, it's easy to see on paper if I graph it out. It's hard to visualize it in such a way that I can do this on screen if this worked at all for you guys. But yeah. Doesn't change the PI bias just as so much. The bias of the phase inverter is set by the tail resistor and the cathode resistor. It's hard to explain. It makes its ground through the presence pot, whichever way the presence is wired up. But the phase inverter is actually set by the tail resistor and the cathode. The point where it connects to the bias circuit and then goes to ground is kind of floating as far as the gain of the phase inverter goes. Within certain limits. If you put a 2 meg pot in there, your phase inverter will sound weird. Hey, K Metal 83, what is the wattage of my big soldering iron? It's 80 watts. I've got that linked in the description of all my videos. The majority of the gear that I use all the time is listed in each description for the videos. I'm glad I don't have to type that each time. I just have that as a default for uploads. I don't think more than a handful of people ever look at that stuff, but it's all there. Hey, Barry Provost, yeah, you can't combine leaded and unleaded solder, and they just don't gel. You get like a hard gray toothpaste that likes to break off if you mix them. Hey, Jim Mass, thank you very much. Pro Reverb ultralinear hum balance. Would it be better getting rid of it by adding 2 resistors or not? Greetings from Greece. Yeah, always get rid of the hum balance pot in 70s Fenders. It's a half watt or a third watt pot, taking the place of 2 half-watt resistors. So, it's if 2 1-watt resistors or half of a third watt pot. So 1/6 of a watt, 1/6 of a watt versus half a watt versus half a watt. It's too much current for those pots. They fail. It's not like they're putting in a 2-watt pot. There's not even 2-watt pot on the market to do that with. So yeah, I'll always get rid of those things. Also, they physically don't have a good ground connection because they're just held to a ground lug, and that ground lug connection always gets loose and corroded in 70s Fenders, and that's one of the reasons that it goes wrong. And you don't need to, it's very, very rare that you need to adjust the balance to more than precisely half. 200 ohm resistors will usually do the job. I do keep a 250 or 100 ohm 2-watt resistor on hand for if I get the rare amp like that high watt a while ago, where the bias resistors don't get it perfect. I'll temp in that pot and turn it until I find what the ratio needs to be, and I might put in like a 82K and 82 ohm and 120 ohm, whatever it needs to be. But because you're correcting for the transformer, once that's locked in, that's pretty much locked in. I have not tried the new JJ double mica 6v6s, Mikhail, but I've heard from other techs that they're just no improvement over the standard JJS, but I've not tried that for myself. Thank you, Thomas A. Carlos. Appreciate that. Are there any carbon comp resistors in a vintage AB763 where a drifted value could damage the amplifier? Les Ghost asks. Yeah, it could. If it's drifted a lot, usually I use 30% as my tolerance. So if you have a 100K resistor that measures 134K, that's beyond its scope in terms of reliability. It's going to continue to drift faster at that point. But I'll listen to it. If I like the sound, I might say, all right, well, I'll put in this 133K resistor that's brand new and lock in that sound of that drift, but with a new resistor that has no damage. But a drifted value is a sign of a resistor that's on its way to failing. And often those old carbon comps, when they begin to drift that much, they've absorbed a lot of moisture, and it's going to go faster and faster until they can either go open, or they can, in other instances, like a power supply, they can burn, like on a screen grid resistor. And so it's not that the drift usually by itself causes problems, though it can in critical points of like a bias supply. But it's a symptom that resistor probably is going to have a short lifespan, typically. But sometimes that drift sounds good, so I always listen when the amp is safe to operate before I change out. I don't ever listen to measure an amp and say, oh, that 220K resistor measures 250K. That's bad. I'll listen to it and say, that's really sounding good, but it's right at the end of its tolerance. Let me put in a new 250K resistor and lock that in without any component issues. So drift can be fun, but you have to know what it is and how to mitigate. Hey, T777. Lead solder on top of some unleaded for the pickup ground wires in a Strat. Seems to be working now. Should I fix it at some point? It is hard to get the old stuff off. It depends on what iron you have and what your techniques are. If I have a Strat that comes in, say an Indonesian guitar, and it's got a whole bunch of that stuff, I will try to remove it from the pot, and I will first, I'll disconnect everything that's on it now, and I will flow some fresh leaded solder on there, and that usually will kickstart the old stuff, and I can, between the solder sucker and the braid, I can usually get that off. Sometimes though, you get a Strat in or whatever, and someone else has been working on it over the decades, and it just has mounds of old yucky solder, and you don't want to put that pot through that anymore. I'm never adverse to just changing out the pots. A really high quality pot's like $5. A typical pot in a guitar is like $2. I just ordered 3 new pots for one of my guitars here. Not the Springfield. It's fine, but there are mechanical things. Let's see. Now I've got to Mark Larkin's question I already answered, but that's when I got confused in the scrolling. Have I any experience with Phil Jones bass amps? What's my opinion on using 8 5-inch speakers? Supposed to say I have. Thank you very much for loving the show. I don't even know that I'm doing a show. I'm just talking in a room and people talking back to me. It's weird, but I can't think of this as a show. That's way too much pressure. I have no experience with Phil Jones bass amps. I have no opinion on what those speakers would sound like, because it's not like all 5-inch speakers sound the same. So much in terms of speaker and cabinet design is volume and materials and how rigid they are and what the resonance frequencies that they are. So you can't say, "Oh, I've got a box. I put 8 5-inch speakers in it, and this is going to sound as good as a 4x10." Well, it may sound as better than some 4x10s, but there may be a PV 4x10 that just kills it. So I can't answer that without having more experience. If Phil Jones is Bose, then I would be inclined to say it's all a bunch of hogwash in marketing, because Bose is hogwash in marketing. Bose sounds terrible. Bose. Quality. Let's see. Rusty Mohican's got I skipped Shane. I'll get to you next, Shane. Sorry, I didn't mean to skip you. Rusty's got a 63 Vibrolux with a 10-inch Oxford. Should he replace the speaker? It depends. First of all, is it working well? Is it in good condition? If it's not in good condition, yes, you should absolutely replace it or have it reconed. Second of all, I'm not a huge fan of the Oxfords, the 12 or the 10. That's subjective. If your Oxford is healthy, I can't tell you to change it. I can tell you that I and many people I know prefer a wide range of other speakers to that original Oxford, which was chosen for a price point in Leo's lineup of amps for these. One of there's the Champ, then there's the Princeton. Those were their student and budget models, and they did not want them to sound as good as their bigger models. So they're a little bit hamstrung. That's why you get the Oxford and the Princeton, you get the Oxford and the Deluxe, you get a C12N in a twin or a Pro. Either way, whether you keep it or you replace it, keep the speaker, remove it carefully, put it in a box, because if you ever sell that amp, someone will want the original Oxford. But I'm not a big fan of them. Plus, that way you can take the original speaker out, put it carefully in a box, put a speaker in there to use and get great sounds out of and gig with or whatever. And then if you sell the amp, keep the good sounding speaker, put the Oxford back in. Hey, it's all original. Sorry, Shane, didn't mean to miss you. Shane is building a RR763, AB763, but I'm having a hard time sourcing the recommended power transformer. Classic Tone's out of business now, Shane. Sorry. So it's a Vibroverb power transformer. Yeah, you want to go to Mojo Tone. Let's see if I can get you a part number. Just a second. Mojo Tone sells Habor, and Habor is good stuff. And Habor is one of the few sources we really have left to us now that Classic Tone's gone, and there's been shakeups and changes at Mercury that make it a little more difficult to use, and they're not very affordable for most end users anyway. So we're pretty much left with Mojo Tone's Habors, and we're left with Hammonds. But let's see what I can find you here. Power transformer for a Vibroverb. Let's see if they got one. And the Vibroverb is going to be the same basic thing as a Super Reverb, I believe, in terms of the transformer. I have to look up 355, 355, 200 milliamps. Let's see here. I think it's going to be the same. It's a 2x6L6 amp. Let's see. 355, 200 milliamp. This one is 355. Hit the wrong view. This one's 355 at 300 milliamp. Might be overkill. Let's see what the next one is. Let's see what they got for a Vibrolux, which is also a similar amp. Almost there. 355, 300 milliamps, yeah. Well, you're not going to find 200 milliamps, but 355 for the Bassman or the Vibrolux is going to be just fine. They both have. I think you'd be fine with either one. Almost interchangeable for a power transformer. So I'll grab the one for the super reverb because that's going to be a very easy thing. Oh, it's a Vibrolux. You said Vibroverb. See, these things matter. Vibrolux and Vibroverb are very different output sections and they require very different power transformers. All right, just 1 second. I got you. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. All right, Vibrolux. That is available. Power transformer. Oops, that's Tweed. Shit. Here we go. And it's still 355 at 300, but you'll be absolutely fine with this, I promise. Here you go, Rusty. Rusty. All right, now we go back up to Rusty's. Now I'm seeing people say there's no sound. That freaks me out because there should be sound. Sound aplenty. All right, let's see. Rusty Mohican is where I was. We're right here at the top of the hour. And we're going to take our first 7-minute intermission. And when we come back, we'll be Sebastian BC 77. So I'll see you guys in 7 minutes. All righty, we are back. And I just want to let you guys know that behind the scenes, when you have a YouTube channel, YouTube tells you how to maximize your money. And according to YouTube, you guys should have already been subjected to about at least six ads in the first hour, at least. And I subject you to none. So if you just give me a like, just help a brother out. Let's see. Where were we? Sebastian. BC77, does it hurt my amp not to use the built-in reverb because some caps are not used? Keep in mind they're not running the amp for a longer time damages the caps. It's not going to hurt the reverb circuit. It's still going to have voltage even if you don't use the reverb. It's going to be fine. If you have the sound cut out, YouTube servers have been having hiccups, and a lot of streams last weekend especially, it fortunately didn't happen to me, but a lot of streams the last week, people have to leave and come back to the stream. So if you lose the sound, leave and come back. I won't say anything too critical while you're not here, and that should fix it. But it seems to be fine on this end. Hey, Taro is here from Finland. Ooh, it was in the 20s here this past week. That's cold enough for me. I want to know if I know anything about a Fender Showman Reverb TFD 5000D. Large box, strip edge, Schumacher transformers, blackface circuit. It's going to depend on the year. Showman Reverb, I believe, is early 70s. Let's see. Let me refresh my memory banks on that one. In general, if it's not black panel, it can be made to be black panel, but sometimes it's good to leave them as they are. I know that's not what the forums will tell you. Let's see. Let me look up the schematic on that one. Everything's too big. I had a PDF open in the browser. I had to make it really big, and now everything is huge. So, all right, Fender schematics. Later, Showman Reverb. AA768 is what I've got here. Let's see, is there another one that I missed? No, just showing the AA768 on my list of Fender schematics, and that is 70s design. Look at the phase inverter, but it's got the blackface era phase inverter. I'm looking at the bias supply. So okay, it's like a post 66 bias supply in terms of the split bias heater balance pot bias balance pot rather than bias adjust pot. Other than that, I'm having a look at the thing sideways. Pretty straightforward. How do they implement the reverb? Is it any different? No, that's basically a head version of a Fender Twin. It's a good amp. No worries. Go forth and make noise with such a thing. Let's see. It's hard to keep track of all the 70s models. Hey, Sean Weatherford, thanks for joining us. No, Richard, you can put an AT in any part of a champ. I wouldn't do it. It won't hurt anything, but the champ's designed for AXs. I don't think there's any part of the champ designed for an AT. You might lose the tremolo. It won't hurt anything. If you want a little less gain here and there, I'd look at 5751s, or if you want a lot less gain, which is probably not what you want in a champ, you could do a 12AY7. But I'd just stick to 12AX7s and maybe 5751. I just saw Don Thompson saying, thanks for the help last Saturday, soldering all the terminal strip ground tangs fixed to Supro amps. Yay, those Supros. Yeah, they really trusted those rivets an awful lot, but I'm glad that I did the fix for you. Let's see, Tom Schaefer, what minimum list of changes, upgrades to 2020 65 Princeton Reverb issue should I request from Amp Tech? Amp sounds okay, but has intermittent crackle and a click when trim is on. I'm hesitant to suggest this because no tech wants to be told, hey, this guy on the internet said you need to do this. I do have quite a few videos on upgrades for 65 Princeton reverbs. I don't have a list put together, but I do have all that information there that other techs can look at, how to fix very common things. It's mostly moving the stuff that gets hot off the kind of flimsy PCB and moving to the octal sockets. A good tech will be on board with that. Intermittent crackle could be a bad solder joint, which is very common with the bad filter caps that they use in the 65 reissue. And a click when the trim is on, that's very, in Princeton, that's a bias trim, so you shouldn't have a click. But again, that click could be tied to a bad solder joint. So I would just say, hey, I'm not telling you your job, but this guy online has this video on how to move all the stuff that gets hot off the board to the octal sockets. I'd like you to look at that and see if you'd be interested in doing that, but don't tell them to do it. A good tech is open to suggestions, but doesn't want to be told their business by some guy on the internet. But all the 65 reissue amps are really good amps with the following two main issues. The stuff that gets hot, the screen grid resistors, the heater connections on the board needs to be moved to the octals, like they did in the 60s. And the filter caps they use are absolute garbage. And as those caps fail, they overheat the connections and they get bad solder joints and they arc. And all those are inexpensive things to fix. I've got some trainers up on the channel already. I've got some Bassmasters and then that big twin reverb equivalent thing that they did. I really like trainers. Never had a Garnet in though. Jacob's converting his 1962 to a dirty Shirley spec during the stream. Wow. Let us know how that comes out. 20 pizzas. That's a lot of pizzas. Emmett Otter's favorite thing to put on a biscuit is sausage, yellow mustard, and grape jelly. Well, you had me until the grape jelly. First of all, jelly and sausage, no. Second of all, grape jelly doesn't belong on food. I'm sorry, grape jelly is disgusting. Strawberry preserves, man, but not on sausage. All right, PD asked the baritone guitar through Vibrolux question a second time. Again, to everyone who hasn't been here before, I answer the questions in the order that they're asked. So if you ask a question and I haven't answered it yet, it means I haven't gotten to your question yet, by and large. So don't ask it a second time, please. And orange marmalade and red currant jelly are great, but not with sausage. Ugh. But and if you can put a question mark or a series of question marks before your questions, it makes it that much easier for me to see them the first time. Hey, Rob Hunter. His Mesa 550 Plus blows a bunch of J175 FETs if multi-pin remote is plugged in while amp is powered on, mutes the reverb circuit, annoying as any way around this, bypassing the JFETs. Well, you're probably getting a spike, and the JFET dying is a symptom of that spike. I'm not familiar with the 550 Plus schematic. Thank God I'm not familiar with that schematic. But it's very likely that they have something. It could be just really poor design. I'm not going to go out on too much of a limb to say it's probably poor design. But it could also be a capacitor that was designed to handle that, which has failed. Maybe they have a tantalum. Tantalums fail all the time. I'd have to look at the amp. But yeah, basically my suggestion is replace the J175s, make it work, and then sell it to some other rube and walk away from it, because it's just going to keep getting worse and worse. Let's see. Modified gas pizza oven gets about 500 degrees Celsius. That'll do it. Thoughts on Finopanoverb? I get asked about that every stream this time. It's not a very original idea. It's probably not really well built, but I've not seen it, and it doesn't matter to me because it's hideous with that yellow everywhere. I never want to see one of those in real life. It just shits all over their design language. can I think of any problems with using a multi-tap output transformer selector switch for a 5E3 build? The only problem would be forgetting which one was supposed to be where if it wasn't labeled. But it's an added complication that you may or may not benefit from. But if you want to use multiple cabs, go for it. You could even repurpose the stupid ground switch if you only need to go between like 8 and 16, and you don't mind running some wire. But if you do that, be careful, because you'll be running the speaker connections past the AC mains to get to that. $222 watching. That's a lot of people. I didn't know that. There's a tab I could open up in the browser to let me see all these things, but it's too much information. I already have the questions here and try to think of somewhat clever things to say. Hey, JD's Associates. Notice the reverb in my amp is starting to feedback. What gives? Immediately I had the Garnet cranked. I said Garnet. Well, if the amp's really loud, you can get a feedback loop just because the tank just keeps vibrating again and again and again. So the fix would be to isolate it acoustically, which means you need to use weather stripping or other kinds of foam, anything you can to dampen the tank itself and isolate the tank mechanically from the cabinet vibrations. Let's see. Hey, Alva Goldbrook. I have worked on a few Rockman things way in the past. They were really spectacularly poorly built. I don't like the sounds that they make. I don't like the sounds they made back in 1985, 87. But people go nuts for them, so. Brendan Gottner. Well, I'm not afraid to send something back to the kitchen when I'm in a restaurant. That's for damn sure. I wouldn't yell at everyone in the factory. It's not the poor people on the assembly line's fault. I'd like to get to the boardroom. Let me go into the boardroom and sort things out. One of the things about these companies is that the designers are perfectly capable of making a really great product, and they're hamstrung by marketing and accountants because they're saying, "Oh, we need an app that do all these things so we can talk about it, but it can't cost us more than $300 each. We're going to sell it for $3,000, but it can't cost us more than $300." And so they're like, well, what can I do? So all the corners get lined up in a row and cut all at once. How about pots for old amps, 20-year-old amp? It depends if the pots are good. I don't change a pot just because it's old, but if a pot needs to be changed, I change it out. What's the ideal time for tubes to heat up prior to playing? Well, the amp will sound better about 45 minutes into the first set, but 3 minutes, start playing in 3 minutes, you're good. That's a rough range. It'll sound better as everything gets hot, but it's safe to play as soon as it makes sound. Hey, Adam Stenzel, got a truly foobarred 70s Fender, needs to be rebuilt from scratch. Do you think worth to replace the wax-covered fiberboard by making fiberglass eyelet? No. Just take everything off the board and get all the wax off with a heat gun and a paper towel and some isopropyl and rebuild it nicely. It's nice to put in a fiberglass board if you design one. And you can do a lot of things, but then it won't be a 70s Fender. And there are always issues, like on that 64 custom board. I'm rebuilding it, and their board is a fiberglass board, but it's a really flimsy one. It's a cheap PCB board that they just put eyelets on. It's really not anywhere near the quality they're promising people. But the issue with any eyelet or specifically eyelet board is on a traditional Fender. You have a backing board. So say my hand is the fiber board beneath, and this is the fiber board on top. You solder here. The solder can't flow down and drip onto the chassis because it's held in place by the board beneath. You do this with a fiberglass board with standoffs and eyelets, you have a chance of solder dripping from here down to there, even forming little stalactites that could cause shorts. So this is a tricky way to solder something without a backing board. You got to be aware of things like that. So it's fine if you want to replace it with a fiberglass new board, but that old fiberboard is just fine once you get all the wax and stuff off of it and clean it all up. It'll take you about an hour, but when you rebuild the thing, it'll be a 70s fender just working really, really well. And a 70s fender that's working really, really well is just as good as a 2-rock or whatever, if the player's up to scratch. Hey, Dr. Paul, when a transformer goes bad, is that usually overheating that melts away enamel or whatever the wines are coated with, hence redipping or recutting wires, lamination a possibility or no? Sometimes it's damage to the insulation, which can be enamel. Sometimes it's actual burning. Basically, the fix for a transformer is to take all the old wire out and rewind it with fresh wire. It's like a pickup. Let's say I got a pickup right here. Here's a Telly Bridge pickup. Underneath the cloth cover is a bunch of wire. And say this thing measures 6K, and there's a break in the wire. If you repair the break in the wire or take off the bad wire and reconnect the new wire, this might be a 5.5K pickup, won't sound the same. No one does that. They just cut the old coil out, they rewind it back to 6K with the same wire, and then it's back to spec. Everything that's in this Telly Bridge pickup is in a transformer done to a different scale, different magnitude, but the concept is the same. So, let's see. Hey, PF, moving from Colorado to Texas, dramatic change in environment, 60s and 70s amps going to be in storage. Any tips to prevent damage? Well, you don't want them to get, are they going in storage and staying in Colorado, or are they just going to Texas and going in storage? Basically, you don't want them to get too hot, like over 120 degrees Fahrenheit, because the Tolex might develop issues, or the plastics can be affected. You don't want them to be too moist, so you don't want them to be stored in high humidity. But basically, if you're comfortable, they're comfortable. They're more rugged than we are, but rugged than we are. But just use common sense. If you wouldn't want to be in that room, they don't want to be in that room, and you don't want humidity, and you don't want real hot temperatures, and you don't want really cold temperatures, and you don't want spiders. If I'm the highlight of your week, Juan, you might be approaching your weeks a little bit wrong. Sorry. Brad says the choke in front of the output transformer center tap was silly and sounds shit. I don't know what model you're talking about. It works really well in an AC-15, but it's not always a good idea for other things. But I don't know which model you're talking about. Oh, gluing the speaker. You put a hole in your speaker. Okay. Greg G. Well, you can fix holes in speakers sometimes with a little bit of tissue paper and rubber cement. Sorry, I misunderstood your question, but that was like an hour ago. Let's see. I'm trying to find the next question. See, that's the trouble with replies to what I'm saying happening so long after I've said it, or me finding them so long after they've said it, that it throws off the back and forth. Sorry about that. How do old Reverber rockets hold up? There's always local listings. They're good amps. They need an awful lot of work, typically, John. A couple things with Ampegs. Number one, the ground schemes are terrible. Number two, the filtering is usually terrible. Number three, they have a lot of brown gluey stuff on the boards and on the wires, which becomes conductive over time. So you see that in some Gibsons as well. I've had quite a few Ampegs come in that needed an awful lot of work, and at the end of that, they sounded fantastic. But I'm not sure if that fantastic is all that different from a fantastic sounding Fender, which typically needs much less work and has much less things to go wrong. So it's up to you. Play one that's working and see what you think. It's a cool sound. I do like the reverb sound of those, and especially the Echo Twin things, where one side has the tremolo, the other side doesn't. You get a little bit of that. Hey, Brad, tell your mom, dad, and Michelle hi from me, and I hope I didn't wake them up. Hey, Lucas Hayden. I like the Vibrolux with Oxfords. I don't like the Princeton with Oxfords, and I don't like the Deluxe as well with Oxfords. But a Vibrolux with Oxfords is a different thing because the 2x10 and the larger cabinet, it's a different sound than you get with the 1x12 or the 1x10. It's not my favorite speaker with the Vibrolux, but the Oxfords are good in a Vibrolux. Still better than the Utahs. Hey, Ken. Guten Abend to you, too. Thank you, Lucas Hayden. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, if you like the sound, you like the sound. It's just not my preference. But of the Oxford equipped amps out there, I like the Vibrolux the best. Cool progress on your Jazzmaster, Victor, and mahalo for being here, and aloha, and other things I dimly remember from Lilo and Stitch. I've had amps in, Brendan, with the Gauss Cetic speakers, but I don't know if they were performing well. They sounded awful. And they were removed from the amps, and newer speakers went in. I don't know whether those were in bad shape or they weren't good speakers, but either way, they did not make the cut. So I don't know that I've experienced them at their full potential. Thank you, Gabriel Ogama. That's very nice of you. Can he use an 8 ohm with a 16 ohm speaker on parallel on the 8 ohms output? So you got an 8 ohm speaker in your amp, and you have another 16 ohm speaker, and you want to run in parallel with the 8 ohms, yeah, you'll be fine. 8 and 16 in parallel is going to make like 6 ohms. That's within the safety margin. You'll be fine. Brad's talking about what I'm talking about with limiting the ground planes and only using them for shielding and only having them in critical points. Ground plane on first two valves, no return currents. Yeah, sorry, Brad. Brad's correcting what I said earlier about the different taps on an output transformer and the voltage divider. It's hard to talk about this stuff when you're not prepped for it. You know, it's like I didn't know there was going to be a test. Hey, Chris K. Well, I think you did really well. You got $700 in a 65 Princeton reissue. And that thing now is going to sound fantastic. You may be one speaker away from a lifetime amp, or you may have a fantastic speaker already, but they don't usually come stock with very good speakers. But I mean, $700 for a really good sounding reissue Princeton. That's a steal. That's even after $200 worth of work to make it great. Magisterium guitars. Shh. Can of worms. Don't go there. Let's see. My opinion of the Hum-X for tube amps to AC outlet. Use them sparingly. The only time I've ever recommended one to a client was a client who had a actual 1963 reverb tank and was using it into his other 60s Fender amps. and to give safety while breaking the ground loop, we got him a Humex for him to plug the reverb tank into, but keep his main amps grounded. Because that way he didn't have a ground lift. His system was still grounded safely. He was protected, but it just broke a ground loop. I think the utility of the Humex is oversold because people don't understand ground. People don't understand what its functional purposes are. It's not just ground. Is not just ground. It's shielding, it's signal, it's and shielding is a big deal. If the shielding's at the input jack, then everything after that is shielded. If the ground connection is made long after the input jack, the input doesn't have any real shielding to it. And then there's ground loops and safety grounds. So Humex is a good product when used properly. It's just rarely used properly. Usually it's used the same way people will use a little ground lift adapter you get from the hardware store that just doesn't have any ground connection at all, and then you can die. Would I consider the Deluxe Reverb to be the golden standard for a solid one-and-done amp? I'm searching for something good for Zeppelin, but it seems like everybody uses them. Jazz Blues. Yeah, it's pretty much as close as possible to the ultimate perfect amp, the Deluxe Reverb. Let's see. Got here a Deluxe Reverb. Got a Casino, which is not my first choice for this sound, but it's the one I have handy. And we'll use an overdrive pedal and see what we get. It's right there. It's all right there if you want it. God, I hope Jeff McElwain's not still in the chat, because I forgot how to play that part. It's weird holding the guitar up here so you guys can see it. Anyway. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. I mean, I hope Jeff is here. I like having Jeff around. He's a cool guy. He's really fun to talk to. But I just, playing in front of guys like that. Thank you, Joe Bucci. Appreciate that. That's very kind of you. Joe Russ has acquired a 40s Epiphone Electro, which appears to have an electro-driven speaker. Yeah, it's going to have a field coil speaker. Yeah, definitely make sure the caps are good before you fire that up. Just too much to go wrong. And I've had a lot of field coil speakers, in my experience, almost always need to be reconed. They're very old. I would go through that entire thing very cautiously to make sure that it is healthy before you power it up. Hey, Eric R., thanks for joining us. Hey, Joe got a DSL 40C. Has an amp. He's got an amp that has a snare drum type noise, almost like brush sticks on a snare. Any idea where I should start looking? Huh. So is it just a constant thing, Joe, or is it when you play? The first thing I would do is I would roll preamp tubes or plug into the effects return. If you plug into the effects return and the noise goes away, the problem's in the preamp. If you plug in the effects return and the noise is still there, problems in the phase inverter or output section. Give me that information if you can, and then I'll see if I can help you out more than that. But yeah, I think it's probably a preamp tube. Brad agrees with me. If it sounds like brushes on a snare, it'd be good for jazz. You can play Wind Cries Mary and accompany yourself. Yeah, the double mica JJs are supposed to hold up better than a combo Ted. The issue is that they don't seem to be. So, speaking of Jeff McElwain, he says the new Zepp movie is awesome. I look forward to seeing it because Lord knows Led Zeppelin needs more of my money. I say that. I hope they didn't hear what I just played, or I'll get the copyright people after me. I don't think I played it well enough to get a copyright strike, especially since I played the bass part, not the guitar part. I always need to figure out what the guitar part for that is. It's something unusual behind the bass part on that bit. Brendan, the Sex Pistols sound, the 10-inch speakers are going to be just fine. There's absolutely no low end whatsoever on the Sex Pistols records. Even the bass is pretty much absent, but the guitar has none. You'll be fine with a Vibrolux. The trouble with chasing the Sex Pistols sound is you're probably everything you try is going to sound better than the Sex Pistols sound. Remember, so much of it's the microphone. Hey, Thanasis, thank you very much for being here. What do I think about the new Marshall Modified Super Lead 100-watt Plexi? Would it be a good idea for home use or too much wattage? It'd be too much of a bad amp for way too much money. My God, those things are garbage. They're just going to be built like hot shit. They're like way overpriced. Get a Friedman. Get a good amp. Get a Friedman. It's going to be great. It's going to work. It's going to be worth what it's worth as long as you want to have it. It has a good master volume if you need to use it for lower volume use. If you really want to use something at home, I would not use any 100-watt amp specifically for home use unless I was running into, say, like an Oxbox or the Fryette thing. There are ways around it, but in terms of an amp for home use, get a Princeton, get a Vibrochamp, get all kinds of stuff. Hell, just get a Tonex or a Fractal thing or whatever for practice, but spend time playing at gig volume with a loud tube amp, because you can't go from playing like an HX Stomp to a big stage with a 100-watt Marshall because you won't have any control over it. You won't have practiced those things, but you can't practice those aspects of playing at home volumes either. So it's a different skill set. It's almost like the difference between nylon string and steel string guitar, that to everyone else they're the same thing, but for most players, that they're very different skill sets that have to be developed. And some guys can do both, and some guys are like, that's alien. Flaming Eternity knows I'm hyper-political, but what do I think about prospects of vacuum tune production and nitro returning due to the massive slashing of red tape regulation going on now? I am not hyper-political. I am extremely worried about the state of the world, and I don't want to go into that right now, but thinking that thieves and rapists and liars and crooks should not be in power is not a political statement. That's just, I wouldn't vote for some people for assistant dog catcher. Western Electric's not going to do anything for anyone. They're not going to be doing any tubes that any of us can afford, as mere mortals. I don't think nitro is going to be returning. I think the state AGs are going to step in because it needs to be stopped. We don't need to have nitro and deregulation. You can do nitro in ways without, you can achieve nitro without killing off so much progress, and it's not slashing of red tape regulation. It's robber barons helping themselves. They finally have the keys to the kingdom. Let's see. Wes is wondering if running 410 volts to 430 volts into a 12AX7 is going to be significantly shortened tube life. Yeah, that's way too hot. voltage. Noticing a lot of reverb drivers running well over the 300 volt spec in the tube chart. Yeah, it's not just that; it's also current. Yeah, so a lot of people don't read data sheets at all. Fender got away with it with the 12AT7 and the reverb amps, but those things are punished, and they don't always make it. Let's see. Recapping an Allen and Heath. Whew. 34 caps per channel. Solder vacuum recommendations. Braid has been too slow. Ask Brad. Brad has got some of the good stuff when it comes to the solder removers. I imagine Hakko would be the way to go. What do I recommend for a volume pot on Telecaster for a fast surge of volume at max peak? Well, I like the vintage taper Mojo Tones. That's a J taper, 20%. That's the way it needed. That's what gives that, and you can do the Roy Buchanan stuff, like Ted Mitch says. Don't spin for paper and oil caps in a guitar or an amp. It's garbage. It doesn't matter what the material of capacitor is in a guitar. There's no voltage. There's no current. Just any cap is fine. Like Magisterium says, most of the 60s Fenders used a real cheap ceramic. I tend to use a film cap because I keep them for amplifiers, and I like the strength of the leads. But if I were just to put a little 50 volt not Panasonic Wema in, that'd be absolutely fine as far as the circuit goes. Does the tube quality of a tube overdrive pedal translate through a solid state amp? It's going to depend, HP Violin, it's going to depend on the nature of the solid state amp. If you're talking like into a Polytone, no. If you're talking into something that's just one of the newer solid state modelers of a tube amp, yeah, it's going to emulate how the tube amp might react to that overdrive pedal. But, it's kind of solid state amps, some of them emulate the sounds we like from tubes really well. Some of them are kind of harsh. I don't think a tube driver pedal, a good tube-based overdrive pedal into a JC120 is going to do what the designer of the pedal intended. Joshua Stevens found 10 whiskers. That's always fine. Yeah, I like a 47 nanofarad with Tellys. I like does the lonesome train thing on a Telly with the 47 nanofarad typically. I run. What am I at on the? I haven't changed this in a while, so I'm set to 700 for most work. 725 is going to be fine too. Thank you, Emac J. Or Emac J. I appreciate that. Thank you. If Classic were to have me replace output bias resistors, screen grid resistors, and output tubes on a Gibson GA15RV, would I mind sharing an estimate of that service? I can't give you an estimate of that because I'd have to see the amp and see if that's all it needed. Typically, it's going to need a lot more than just those things. But in a mythical world where everything else is perfect, and all you need to do is just change those things, and it gives them a GA15RV, $150. Covered the first 2 hours. That would be 2 hours worth of work to take it apart, do the work, confirm it's working, and put it back together again. But it's never that simple on old Gibson GAs. There's always something else. Hey, Music Nerd, what are the best mods to help give an AC15C1 more headroom before breaking up on the normal input? Well, it already is modded to have less breakup on the normal input with that 330K in series before the volume pot. Use the low gain input jack. You don't need to mod it at all. It's got, well, the 15 doesn't have the low gain input jack, does it? All right, let me show you something then. I have to go back to this. All right. What the input, the low gain input on a guitar amp does, can you hear me, or is the hum from the single coil? Let me do it this way. I have to do it this way. Is the hum from the single coil affecting my voice? Is it making me gate? I can't tell. No, I'm not. I'm not gated. All right, cool. So if I play with the volume pot on 10, if I lower that down to like 7, maybe 7.5 on this knob, that's essentially what the low gain input on your amp is doing. So if you want to have more headroom out of your AC15C1, you can either run your guitars down, or you can use a volume pedal and back it off a little bit, and then you get, instead of, no mod necessary. I do mods. I do mods all the time, but the best advice I can give anyone about mods is make sure you need to do it before you do any mods. A lot of people just like to sell mods. If everyone sells hammers, then all of a sudden everything's a nail. Hobo Rody says, I noticed once that all the red stripe resistors were not within 10%, but rather a full 10% out of spec. Well, they were most of the resistors in a Fender are 20% tolerance caps. So silver bands are on most of the resistors in a Fender, and those are 20% tolerance resistors. Did I say caps? Resistors. Most Fender amps of that period only used the gold band 10% caps. Shit, I did it again. Resistors on the bias resistors, the 220K bias leak resistors. That's the only place where Fender found it really critical. Oh, and some stuff in the harmonic trim amps where they wanted it balanced, they'd use the gold bands there. Friedman versus Metropolis. Arm wrestling or drinking? Because arm wrestling, my money's on George. Drinking, my money's on Dave. Other than that, they're both great guys, both make great amps. They sound different. They have different feature sets. Play them, see what you think. One of them's going to be more right for you. Hey, Don Thompson. This question today is about ghost notes. Seems like notes are beating against 60 power supply. I can't talk. 60 cycle power supply ripple. Any help or advice? Don, it depends on the amp you have and whether that's normal. Because if you have, say, an old AC15 or AC30 or a JTM 45, that can be kind of normal. It should not be the case in most Fenders and other Marshall stuff. But yeah, typically ghost notes are going to be more apparent on the neck pickup than on the bridge pickup. And often you will find if you go to the neck pickup, here from the 10th fret to the 15th fret, you're going to get really bad ghosting. That's a great way to tell. The other way to tell, let me unmute this again. I'm not trying to show off for you guys or anything. Obviously, I'm not a player worth showing off, but one of the things that I use to test how an amp is when it comes in is I'll play this minor 10th. Make sure that's in tune. That was beating a little bit. But an amp which has ghost notes, that will often, there it was, the low E was out. There we go. Sorry. Once the guitar is in tune, on an amp which has any ripple, these will sound horrible. And you'll really hear that. It gets really sour and beats. But also playing up the neck on the neck pickup, like I said. Now, I have no idea why that major minor 10th shows it more than a major minor third does, but it sure does. Maybe it has something to do with the frequency range. Maybe it has something to do with the overtone series of the amp. Maybe it's just the stretch tuning on a guitar. I don't know why. If the IR caps aren't leaking in a deluxe reverb, would I replace them? IR, I mean IC caps. Yeah, I replace IC brand caps on site because they're garbage. Hey, Scott Chris, I'm glad you're able to fix your hot rod DeVilles and Deluxes and such. That's good. The world needs more amps that do work and fewer amps that don't. Turo is here. All right. So it's probably, if it doesn't have, if it's drip edge, does it have the vertical lines? I'm not sure if the Showman had the vertical lines around the logo. It's probably 68, 69, 70. They're good amps, though. Hey, Matt Johnson, the biggest thing to deal with a 6G15 reverb unit is to look at the schematic for the original, not the schematic for the reissue, and then to look at the schematic for the reissue and look how they did their grounding, because they have a safety ground, but they don't have ground loops, and there's an isolation thing there that they did that's really difficult to incorporate into the vintage one in terms of existing vintage one, but if you're building one, it's really critical to incorporate, so you have a floating ground reference, so you have a safety ground and you have the audio ground, and never the twain shall meet except through a capacitor. And that way you don't have to use any weird cables or HumX units to connect it to an amplifier. So aside from the way that grounding is done, the circuit should be that of the old one, but then you need to change the ground scheme so that all the stuff is separate from the chassis except at one point. And it's pretty easy to figure out from the reissue. Coming up on the second hour, let's see. Hey, WikimG is looking for a one-channel amp that has a Fender clean channel sound and reverb. Even the reverb is not that necessary. Smallest 50, 60 watt head possible. All right, well, if you don't need the reverb and you don't need tremolo, you're describing a Bandmaster. Now, there's not a one-channel amp out there from Fender that does it, but if you're okay with it having reverb, look at the Sir Bella. If it's at all within your price range, that's what you're describing. That's a really, really great sounding amp. It's basically a 50 watt 1x12 classic Fender single channel. Hey, Patriot American. Really appreciate my channel. Got an old 73 Vibrochamp, very clean, all original. What's the most common issues and service work I've seen on these? On Vibrochamps, filter caps, grounds, and DC buildup on the board. That's pretty much all there is to it. There's such a simple amp. So change out all the electrolytics, make sure all the grounds are good and clean, and get all the DC leakage off the board. Make sure the pots are clean, all the hardware is tight. Should be just fine. Very simple amps. They should. The fact that Fender doesn't have a modern version of a Vibrochamp on the market for $600. No digital anything, no additional channels, no other features, just a Vibrochamp. You know, volume, treble, bass, speed, intensity, $500, $600. There you go. Put it in with a 1x10, and everyone will line up around the block to get it. And ideas for a 1x12 cabin speaker to use with a Champ. Find a 1x12 cab of whatever cosmetics you like that a Champ can sit on, and then get the speaker that you like the sound of. I talked about Fender clean and speaker sounds earlier in the chat. Is a Haybor better than the Fender original C Sharp? It's comparable to the Schumachers that Fender used in the 60s and 70s. It's better than what Fender is using today. In general, the Fender reissue amps today use good transformers, but not the 64 Customs. The 64 Custom. uses this puny little piece of shit. It's not worth piddly squat. All right, coming up to the second hour, we're going to take another 7-minute intermission, and then we'll come back to EMAC-J, and we will try to speed run through the last hour's worth of questions. And I appreciate you all being here. See you in a bit. let me get my bearings here. Before we get back into it, I've noticed something interesting the past week or so. I don't do a lot of industry talk on here or speculation about trends and all that. But as far as the amplifiers side of things have gone, it's been very clear for a good long while that Fender and Marshall are on a race to the bottom. Just who's going to be king of the landfill. But really interestingly, in the past couple of weeks, as Fender's released this new standard line of Strats and stuff made in Indonesia. Nothing wrong with Indonesian instruments. They can be fantastic. But right between the Squier Classic price point and the Made in Mexico Player price point, they've got this new standard line of guitars. And something very interesting has happened. All the YouTube channels that do gear reviews, paid and otherwise, the ones that we usually kind of dismiss as shills, they've all been kind of saying, what the fuck? These things are crap. Fender's actually getting pushback from the people who have just taken anything that they've put out and said good things about. They have finally I think Fender might be beginning to find their bottom. They have gone down, 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 and now even the people who will find something nice to say are like, this is not good. What are you doing, Fender? So let's see how this plays out. But I think it's good. I think it's a good thing for everyone when companies just assume their customers are suckers who'll buy anything, and they just push anything out that they want on them. For the customers to say, wait a second, that's horse shit. I'm not buying that horse shit. So let's see how it plays out. What's good to do in Memphis? Live music stores. Martin Music on Poplar is the music store that you want to go to. Fantastic selection, electric, acoustic, high-end stuff. Great guys, great people. Live music, you can go to Beale Street if you want to. Find Wild Bills if you want to hear the good stuff. And they usually have really good music playing in Overton Square at Lafayette's Music Hall. Most Memphians I know don't go to Beale Street at all. Beale Street's just, brought to you by Bud Light, and it shows. There's great food everywhere you turn. It's hard to find bad food here. It's really easy to find bad tourist stuff. So, downtown's overrated. Graceland's crappy. Sun Studios is awesome. The Stax Museum of Soul Music is phenomenal. It's really hard to find bad things to do here, but people manage all the time. And you can see the bait shop of the gods at the Bass Pro Shops in the Pyramid. Hey, D-Dubs Light. Have I seen much from 65 amps? I have had a few 65s, for whatever reason, mostly the London. I had 2 or 3 of the Londons in. And overall, they're pretty good amps. They had some design quirks and some boosts that didn't really do what I thought they should do, and that they were just doing it by taking away a cathode bypass cap and then putting it back. And the trouble is when you have an unbypassed cathode, you have more that triode is more susceptible to hum. And so the unbypassed, non-boosted channel was hummy, and then you turn on the boost and the hum went away. So I changed that so that the channel was always bypassed and there was a voltage divider doing the boost instead, which made it a much more usable amp. And the way they had implemented a tremolo engage, the way the tremolo engage was really noisy because they copied the 74X, and I modified that to get rid of that. I was really shocked to watch the sudden decline of 65 amps. I really liked Dan Buell's content on his YouTube channel, but he used to do what I'm doing now. And I thought that they were really an amp company to watch, and I expected great things, and then they just all of a sudden were gone, and I don't understand what happened there. Maybe I'll get in touch with Dan Buell sometime. He'll give me the skinny. It's both Peter Stroud and Dan Buell I have great respect for, and I think most of the products were really great. And I've the ones that I've heard but not opened up, I thought sounded great. So I don't know what happened. But you can make a really good amp in this business and just not catch on because yeah, it's a weird industry. 7025 tube is a low noise, low microphonic 12AX7. So basically, Electro-Harmonix, they make one 12AX7, and the ones which pass all their tests get labeled as 7025s with the silver lettering, and the ones which aren't as good get the gold lettering 12AX7 and are sold at a slightly lower price. And I've had really bad experiences with the 12AX7 Electro-Harmonixes, but the 7025s are quite good. So I recommend the Electro-Harmonix 7025s. It is not marketing. The marketing nonsense comes when you get to cryogenically treated, when you get to gold pins and all that stuff. No, the EH 7025s are good. The EH 12AX7s are the stuff that wasn't good enough to be sold as a 7025. Hey, Ken Smithson, have I heard about Rogue Softec 5Y3s with 1400 volts on the plate? I think you might mean 400. There's no possible way that a Softec or any tube rectifier could make the B plus higher than it would be with solid state. But yeah, I've seen quite a lot of the Softec 5Y3s that aren't true 5Y3s and are really small bottle GZ34s. So they're not going to have the voltage drop of a true 5Y3. And that's why when an amp comes in that needs a 5Y3, I try to get a new old stock Joint Army Navy Philips or such from the 70s because they're still available for pretty low prices. Let's see, people talking about what to put on biscuits. Yeah, J175s and 174s are really crazy expensive right now. That's because they're obsolete. No one's using them except old PV and Mesa designs pretty much from our perspective. And maybe Brad will sell you one for $2. Let's see. Everyone's making me hungry, and then they talk about grape jelly, and then I'm not hungry anymore. Wes has got me now. Buttermilk biscuits with local orange blossom honey. That's all right. I'd hit that like button. Randy Steffs, well, if your garnet's already fixed, I don't need it. You play the damn thing. I appreciate the thought. I'm sure eventually I'll get a garnet in. Just, I'm in Memphis, Tennessee. It's quite a ways from Canada. And garnet didn't really have any dealers in this part of the world, so I'm not sure how many have drifted down here. Even the trainers are pretty rare. Let's see. Okay, you remove the bright caps on your 5F6A and it's lovely to your ear. Well, your ear is what counts, Progress Pedals. If you like it without the bright caps, that's fine. But bright caps at the input, it shouldn't have any bright caps at the input. I'm not sure what you mean by that. The Rockman is a sound. You're absolutely right, Wes. But Def Leppard did all right with it, but that's a very unusual context for that kind of thing. Hey, Son of Pyro, thank you so much. Let's see. You got a great big old Tone Clone upgraded power transformer. Power transformer is so large they remounted the chassis fit too close to speaker. Any concerns? If it's not physically obstructing the speaker, but it's just very, very close, you're fine. Should be a good amp. It's a really nice transformer. I think it's a little bit overkill. I'm not sure what benefit you would have in a deluxe reverb with that massive stack, but it won't hurt anything. That's so weird that they remounted the chassis just because it should just be a difference this way, and the speaker on deluxe reverb is offset from center. So I'm not sure why that would be necessary. But if they're not touching each other, you should be fine. Let's see. Okay, output transformer. That makes more sense. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I was wondering if from that model number, with the output transformer, I'm not sure if there's any benefit to that massive output transformer in a deluxe reverb, but it's a good quality thing. And if it's not physically contacting the speaker, you're fine. I think it's of marginal importance, but of no harm. Hey, Brendan, did I consult Vox and am I allowed to speak about it? Did I tell them how to improve the AC10 and AC4? I'm allowed to speak about anything I want to speak about. There are things I choose not to, but it's not because a third party is telling me not to. I have consulted with Vox unofficially in the past. When Mitch Colby was at Vox, he and I sussed out the issues with the Custom Classic effects loop. And I have spoken to a current vice president at Vox about some things, and I know that they are aware of my videos on the AC10 and AC4. I don't know whether they're going to implement any changes. I hope that they will, but they are aware of it, and what I've heard is that they want to make their stuff really good. But I think there might be some politics involved within the company between different divisions, so I don't want to speculate as to that, but they are aware of the issues that I've pointed out with AC10 and AC4. Whether they do anything to those models or whether there is another model that will come out in a couple of years that rectifies all that, I don't know. I have not been officially consulted, and my bank account reflects that. I would be glad to fix their stuff. The trouble is, I don't have a piece of paper which says I don't have a degree in electronics. I have 30 plus years of experience in electronics and amplifier electronics, but I don't have a piece of paper. And Vox has to hire people with a piece of paper. Trouble is, the pieces of paper these days for electronics degrees they're not degrees in how tube amps work with all the heat and current. They're degrees in how to build a cell phone or a satellite transmitter or a Cisco router. And the operating conditions inside a router are very different than the operating conditions inside an amplifier. And a lot of the stuff made in the last 10, 15, 20 years has obviously been designed by someone who was overqualified to build a VCR. They were ready to build the next DVD player or Blu-ray, but instead they were hired by a company that does this obsolete stuff. And their design works fine on paper, but in practice it catches on fire. So, but I'd be glad to consult. I've done some consultation on some very small scales for a couple of companies, and to say anything more than that would be blowing smoke up my own butt, and it's not important. Let's see. Trying to find the next questions. Magoo, is it better to leave an amp on all day or turn it on or off? Play for a while, go do stuff, come back, play for a while. Your electricity bill will be better if you turn it off. I'd say if you're not going to be playing for more than 30 minutes, turn it off. I mean, I've had this Deluxe on for 2 days now because I'm testing it. But, it takes 2-3 minutes to warm up. It's no big deal. In theory, it's the heat cycling of the tubes that puts the most wear on the tubes, but you got to balance out with your electricity bill. So now, I wouldn't leave it on all the time. Turn it on, play it, turn it off, unless you're just going to be gone for 20 minutes. You can leave it on for short periods of time. I don't think you can wax pot a transformer, mate. Well, Sean, you have not looked enough old JMI, Woden and Haddon and Albion transformers. Those things were wax potted. Trust me, I've seen the drips. Let's see. Hey, Matthew Arnold. I'm not an electrician by any means. I watch your amp ground scheme videos. When I ground the amp at different points in the chassis, how do I avoid ground loops? Well, did you watch part 1 where I talk about the ideal versus the good enough versus what Marshall did? Because I actually show in that video with diagrams how I avoid ground loops. Basically, I'm saying that everything after a coupling cap, which is tied to the next triode should have its ground reference to the cathode ground of that triode. And then if you have 2 triodes or 3 triodes or just 1 triode on a filter node, all those cathode ground points should go then ideally to the same ground point that the filter for that node is at. And then that should be either tied to a heavy-duty bus bar or a very large trace or the chassis in sequence with everything else. So if you look at the chassis from right to left, you may have all the HT stuff here, then all the screen and phase inverter stuff here, and then the preamp stuff here. And so you're treating that area of chassis like a great big bus, and it functions that way. But everything on the board is only connected to ground at the cathode of its stage, and those cathodes of the stages are connected to ground where the filtering of that stuff is. So all these cathodes are coming over here. All these cathodes are coming over here. Everything's in sequence from the noisiest to the quietest stuff, and the quietest stuff is by the input. Beyond that, see the first video with all the diagrams and stuff where I talk about all this stuff. And once you do that, you don't have any eddy currents, you don't have any ground loops, because there's not a multiple point to ground in the sequence. And I'm not going to ground here, then going to ground here, then going to ground here. It's called galactic ground, which is, people are like, oh, you need to star ground that. Star grounding is a great way to get a really noisy, buzzy, awful sounding amp. I use the galactic ground, and Merlin talks about this. Hey, Hulk Hoagie just got a Tone King Imperial Mark II. Told us from 2022. We need to confirm with Tone King. Any preventative work or known problems with that amp? I've only had one of the current production Imperials, I think. Look at my channel to see. I've previously seen the Mark Bartel era Imperials, which were built differently. Most of the Tone King stuff I've got on the channel right now is the Sky King series, which are very different. I don't want to warn you away from the Imperial because I don't have anything to warn you about. Just make sure all the hardware is tight and you like the sound. Let's see. I have not tried modulus transformers, Sean. Are anchovies good on peanut butter and sausage? Fuck you, Goody Guitars. Fuck you. Anchovies, my ass. Pineapple Marmite. Ugh, might as well toss some anchovies in there. Tastes like fishy eyebrows, salty fishy eyebrows. Deadeye Cold Cuts, I don't have any opinion on your local builder who builds brown panel Vibroverb 2x10s. I did talk about that last chat, I think, but I can't venture an opinion on what your local builder has done if I have not seen what they've done. 0 to guitar face in 0 seconds. Yeah, the guitar face is a thing. Back when I used to gig, I'd always either have a cigarette in my mouth or I'd chew gum, which seemed to prevent that, but I don't chew gum anymore, and I don't smoke in the house, so you guys get 100% guitar face. Sorry. That's one of the reasons when I do videos where I'm playing, you only see the guitar, you don't see this, because I got everything John Mayer does except the money and the talent, but I got the faces. You got to have a sense of humor about yourself, right? What is the easiest, least invasive, and fully reversible way of installing a bright switch to a deluxe reverb reissue? I disconnected the cap on mine, but I feel I might need it from time to time. Thanks. There's not really one because the way the nature of the board, you can't put a push-pull pot in there, and because where the PCB is, you can't really fit a switch too easily on the front panel. I mean, you could, but it'd be tricky. Or then if you change your mind, you'd have a hole in the front panel. And if you put it on the rear panel or on the bottom of the chassis, if you put it on the rear panel, you got to run long leads from kind of sensitive part of the circuit past all the heater stuff to the rear panel. And if you put it on the bottom of the panel, it's really hard to reach. In general, I'd say find one that you like and stick with it. And if you really need to change it out, consider upgrading to a Vibrolux or one of the other larger fenders that has the switch. In a Deluxe Reverb, you can put a tiny little switch between the volume pot and the input jack, but if you change your mind, you've always got a little switch hole there, or a little switch. So there's not a really good way to do it. What do I think of Ike Turner's Strat sound? I don't really, to me, it's weird. I mean, there's the Ike and Tina stuff, and I don't think of a guitar sound on that stuff. And then there's the Rocket 88 stuff that wasn't a Strat. But I'm not up on Ike Turner's greatest hits. Not a fan of him as a person, for all he accomplished. Let's see. I have no thoughts on the PRS HRDX 20 Dude Crush. Sorry, haven't had one come in. If I ever have one come in, I'll have an opinion on it, and I'm open to it. But they only came out a short while ago, and I don't do warranty work for PRS, so it's about now, I guess, that they would start to need repair past warranty. So I'll probably be seeing some. Let's see. Looking for the next question. Sorry. Here, what is my opinion on Kingsley tube pedals and experience with them? I have a couple of videos up on a Kingsley I had to repair, and I admitted in the video that I had very low expectations because most tube pedals are marketing tubes at low voltage and low current. There's there to have something glow, and you can say it's a tube pedal. Kingsley's excellent. Sounds great. Built really great. It's a great circuit. I think he does fantastic work. And while I've only tried the one model, it was really good. And I would certainly, if I were in the market for such things, I would certainly look into them. Honestly, if I want a sound that a pedal gives, I tend to build the pedal myself or design something that will do it. But I'm not in most people are not in my position, and I think the Kingsley stuff is really fantastic. So, highly recommended if you have the price and you have the need. It's an expensive pedal. Make sure that a OD1 doesn't do what you need before you spend something just to have the cachet of an expensive pedal, I guess. But for some things, it's worth it for a subset of players. Let's see. How do RC Fields says, how do tube socket plug-in mods affect heater voltage amperage? Having extra 12-volt tube added to amp with power transformer designed for it. I'm not sure what you're asking. Like adding an extra tube stage? If you're adding an extra, where are you getting a 12-volt tube? I'm not sure what you're asking here. I mean, if you add an extra 12x7 to an amp, usually it's not going to affect anything as far as the transformer goes. But I'm not quite sure what you're asking. The tube socket plug-in mods. Sorry. See if you can ask the question again and a little more clearly. I'll be glad to answer if I can. Hey, Christopher Quine, 68 reissue Vibrochamp is humming along great these days. Swap speaker, tighten stuff, swap tubes, boom. Good. It's a good amp. It's not a reissue of anything because it's got reverb for whatever reason. The good news is if that reverb ever dies, the amp works without it, and the rest of it is a good Vibrochamp. Yeah, I think it's a nice sounding little thing, though. Hoffman fiberglass eyelet boards for Fender amps, worth the time and effort. If you're building something from scratch, sure, the Hoffman stuff is fine. I wouldn't put one in an old Fender amp. I like Doug, and I use Doug if I build a custom amp, I design my board and I have him manufacture it because he's got all the CNC stuff set up. He can make it. It takes him like 20 minutes to have his machine make it, where it take me hours. And he does really good work. And his designs work. I have theoretical differences with his designs, the way he does his bus wires and ground stuff. I don't find his stuff as elegant as what I do. But that's I'll admit that's purely subjective. Maybe I've got my head up my butt. But he does good quality stuff. But I wouldn't replace an existing Fender board with one. But if you're building an amp from a kit, it's probably better than the fiber board that comes with the kit. Michael Smith prefers a 2x10 to a 1x12, and that's cool. I like having all these things. If I had my way, I'd have a 2x12, a 1x12, a 2x10, a 4x10, a 4x12. I'd have like 4x12s, and I'd have a larger house to put them in. Hey, Rob French, thanks for joining us. Let's see. Oh, I know how to make turret boards, Kevin Ullman. I just don't want to do it because it's such a pain in the bus. But why did I say bus? I guess I was talking about the other board with bus. It is a pain in the bus. Yeah. If you've not done it and you want to learn how to do it, it's fun to do it, to lay everything out and do the right size drills with a drill press and then swage in all the turrets or crimp in all the eyelets. You can do all that kind of stuff. And it's fun to do one, but if you want to do 50, not fun at all. I much prefer to have Hoffman do it because he's got it all set up with a CNC and an auto thing, And I've only ever had one turret that I had to retighten after, it wasn't all the way swaged from Doug, and I know how to do that. I got my little nail punch and a hammer and swaged the hell out of it. Let's see. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. Where can I get a tool to adjust my vintage-style Fender truss rod? Alex241 says. A vintage-style Fender truss rod, it would be a Phillips or flathead screwdriver. Are you talking about the bullet truss rod, where it would be a hex nut? Every hardware store is going to have those. Some of them are going to be metric, some of them are going to be SAE, but I don't know which one you would need because the vintage styles kind of depend on the model because there's metric ones made in the vintage style. And there are vintage style Fenders that have hex truss rod adjustments in the heel as well, in which case it's usually at 4 millimeter. But in terms of an actual vintage Fender neck, it's a flathead or a Phillips head screwdriver, and you just get the right size one that fits without chewing it up. And while StewMac will sell you a screwdriver, so will Lowe's or Home Depot or Ace, or if you have any local ones, or whoever you have in the UK or Europe. Everyone's got screwdrivers of some sort. Spanners, sorry. Spanners are wrenches. That's right. Sorry. There's a Spaniard in the works. Allen amps were really good kits, and then the stuff that they built was even better than most of the kit builds. But yeah, Allen made great stuff. Had really nice transformers. Josh Hufford, sorry. I'm trying to get Trying to get through the last questions in this last hour. Yeah, YouTube reviews are almost all garbage, and I don't do too many reviews. When I do, I try to make sure that there's 100% no garbage. Even if it means even if I'm giving a good review, like on the Springfield, it's an unbiased, unpaid good review. And, I'm nice. So I've had some companies ask me to review things, and I check it out. I'm like, oh, this is not good enough to recommend, but it's not bad enough to warn people away from. So I'm just going to avoid this. I've got too many other things to do. If it's a bullet truss rod, 3/16 sounds right. Yeah, but Allen wrenches are typically going to be 3 millimeters for a metric, and 4 millimeters for a metric, and 3/16, I believe, for a SAE, or it's going to be a good old fashioned flathead or Phillips screwdriver. Just make sure that it fits precisely before you start turning it, because there's a lot of torque involved, and torque when the tool does not fit the nut, you just end up damaging things. Let's see. And somehow everything scrolled back up. Scott Christ, if you like your gold tongue saw EC 803Ss, that's great. But the gold pen is not why you like them. Gold pen does absolutely nothing of use in a guitar amp. It just costs more for no reason. Hey, Colin Demo. I like the Neo Creamback. I don't like it as well as the regular Creamback, but of the Neo speakers I've tried, the Creamback is the best sounding one I've tried so far. And there's a video I've got up testing the Neo Creamback with a 1965 Deluxe Reverb compared to a non-Neo speaker, and I thought it held up really well. It's a different sound, but it's a good sound. You can find that on my channel somewhere. Let's see. Hey, Sebastian, I use the square plugs. He had a discussion that the housing of the plugs touching each other can cause issues. True, never had issues. In theory, you wouldn't want the shells be touching each other, because you would want to have the only ground path be through the cable, not to have ground path through the cable and through the shell. The issue would not be if they were really touching, but if they were just kind of touching and some corrosion built up. So you'd have kind of a ground path here and a better ground path here, then you have two different paths to ground. In general, though, it's not going to be an issue for those short links, but something to be aware of. And if you get that, then one little strip of electrical tape on one of the square plugs will insulate them from each other, so it's not anything too problematic. But I best practice is for them not to touch, but they can be very close to each other. Golden Nugget Recordings, is there any reason you can do cathode bias on 4x KT88 type power sections? You mean why you can't? Cathode bias draws an awful lot of current from the power transformer. That's why cathode bias amps are typically 6V6 or EL84s, and rarely you will see a few that will use two 6L6s or two EL34s. Rarely will you see two KT88s or a quad of larger tubes. Larger tubes draw more current than small tubes, and when you draw more current, you need a lot more power transformer to handle the current being drawn for cathode bias. So to have a quad of cathode biased KT88s, you'd have a massive power transformer, and you'd still have much less output level available to you than if you just used fixed bias with a much smaller output transformer. So the savings you get with a quad of EL84s or a pair of 6V6s, you can save a lot of money by doing cathode bias. and it fits a niche in what people want in terms of output level, but it doesn't require you to have a massive transformer. If you're going to spend the money to get a transformer big enough for KT88s, my God, you could have built 2 fixed bias KT88 amps, if that makes sense. But if you meant why you can do, I don't know, because I mean you can, but it would be not great. Hey, Mike Shui, you're thinking of normal operation. You have to look at overage conditions. You don't want a cathode resistor to fail under a momentary surge or a spike. So you always want to go twice as much as what is likely to be there. There are things that I like to fail, like a heater balance resistor. I want it to fuse if necessary, so a half-watt flame proof is great. If there's too much current, it'll open up and the power transformer is protected. I don't want a cathode resistor to fail. I want it just, if it's going to be there at all, it's only there to measure current. So I don't want it to be failing, and I don't want it to be operating at its limits because I don't want the value to change. I want it to be a 1 ohm or a 10 ohm or whatever I've chosen for easy metering. I don't use them myself. I don't think it's necessary. But if you're going to have a 1 ohm resistor on a cathode just for measuring bias, which is not the same as cathode bias amps, I'm talking about just for measuring purposes, you'd really want to have that rated for much more than you'd have with any surges or spikes. Because if you want to limit it, you then want to put in maybe a 250 milliamp fuse. So if there's a problem with the tube, the fuse goes and not the resistor. But if you're not going to have a fused resistor, which would then also, perfect setup, if you want to do it, have the resistor with a fuse ahead of it and a diode across it to handle spikes, fine. But just having the resistor there, use a 1 watt. You won't have a problem in a healthy amp with a 1 watt. Does that make sense? But you're absolutely right on paper. Just that things don't always work the way they do on paper. Ken Smithson, you won't ever have 1400 volts coming out of a 5Y3 ever. If you put the Sovtek in instead of an old Sylvania or something, it can't add more voltage than the power transformer can put out. So you get a power transformer that's 300, you're never going to have more than 400 volts possible. Whatever it is. What is this? We'll get a calculator here. 300 times 1.42. 426. Yeah, so say 430 is the max. And the tube rectifier cannot make it go to more than 430. You're actually going to have less than 430 because of loading and all that, but maybe in space. Bo is in space. I saw a wiring diagram that had a bias pot and bias trim, Milo316 says. What is the purpose? Well, one's going to be adjusting the overall bias voltage going to each tube or each pair of tubes. The other one's going to be adjusting the balance so that if this tube set needs more or this tube set needs more, so you get everything to match. Usually it's not necessary, and it's just one more complication where things can go wrong, but it can be done really well. It's just usually the companies that do that also want to use these little bitty blue square pots that really aren't rated for the current, and so they don't like it. Let's see, where was I? Hey, Sirius. Hey, Alex. Made the live stream. Welcome, Alex. It's very early where you are. I appreciate you joining us. Hey, Son of Pyro. Yeah, I still have and love the SG. Since I started the bathroom remodel, since the wall that I've been banging on and making changes to is also the wall which has held up my 5 guitar holder. Those guitars have not been hanging. And so of my guitars, the SG and the 335 have been in their case for the most part during this process because I don't like to leave them on the stand. And I certainly don't want to have the chance of them falling off the wall if the wall has an issue, because Gibson headstocks are just looking for an excuse. So if I drop a Strat I worry about whether I ding the floor. If I were to drop this casino and the headstock broke, I get it fixed, probably be stronger afterwards, no big deal. I'm prolonging the inevitable day when I do something stupid and snap off the headstock of the 335 or the SG, but they will come out of the case pretty soon. Or if an amp comes in where I really need that sound, I'll get them out. I love those guitars, both of them, and I really do like the SG. But since I've been doing so much construction, I've been mostly playing the Fenders because I don't have to worry about their delicate sensibilities. Hey, AV Valley 91, got a Vox little night train, has some sentimental value, has a bad power transformer. I'm sorry to hear that. If you are comfortable discharging the caps, is this a replacement that would be okay for a beginner? Well, my first concern was whether you'd be able to get that replacement transformer anymore. Vox no longer sells replacement transformers for the AC-15 Custom Classic. I know that. They don't have them in stock. And I believe the Little Night Train is from the same period. So if you can get the Little Night Train power transformer, it wouldn't be that, that's connect the dots. You take out the old one, put the new one in exactly the way the old one was in. If you cannot get that transformer, it's a moot question. My concern would be if something in the amp was going wrong that caused your transformer to go wrong, then your new transformer might be subject to damage. And that's not the kind of thing that a beginner needs to suss out. There are a lot of factors there. I'm just worried if it's a Little Night Train has no resale value. I hate for you to spend $200 on a transformer and 6 months later it's dead as well because of something in the amp, where you could spend that money towards something that's going to last better. I'm not a big fan of the Night Train series. But if you are, it really means something to you, and you can get the transformer, go for it. Just, discharge the caps and work carefully, and maybe put it in, and then take it to a local tech and say, hey, would you check everything I did before I power it up? Make sure you don't see any other issue that might cause this issue. Hey, Colin Demo. I don't know what the best Class D amp is. I know what isn't. Most of the ones on the market are not the best. The trouble with Class D stuff is it is a free lunch. It is a cheap, lightweight, small, high-power thing. And when that comes, the trade-off, it's cheap, and it's built cheaply, and it's built disposably. The good news is a new ICE module, if you can find the right one, and the documentation for the jumper positions is available. It's about $120. I hope that someone out there is making better ones than the ICE modules, but the ones that most of the amp companies for guitars and basses are using are the cheapest ones that don't last. And you tell people that they don't last and they don't believe you because they saw a review or whatever. Sometimes you're very lucky and it's like a blown out ferrite bead, or you can find the one thing and fix it. Usually you have to replace the entire board, but what if some other problem in the amp is causing that? It's hard to know. Let's see. Where was I? Did I skip? I scrolled on me, sorry. Between output, power, and choke, where will I see the most benefits for tone and sound quality when changing out these transformers? B. Trillman asks. It really depends on the model of amp and what quality of transformers are there now. If you have, say, a Fender reissue, you're probably not going to hear any benefit changing out any of them unless one of them is defective. I'm talking about the 65 reissue series where the iron is quite good. not the 64 custom where the iron is absolutely crap. If you've got a Vox, the power transformers tend to be quite good of the current production stuff. The output transformers are good, but you might discern a slight difference if you're to change the output transformer, because output transformers do introduce subtle changes, and a Vox is so compressed that those changes are going to be more exaggerated in its output than it would be in, say, a Deluxe Reaver. Exception being if you have a 90s Vox, like an old AC30 TB or TBX, the power transformers in those things love to go buzzy. They love to be noisy. Those things fail. Always a good idea to change those. And same thing goes for Marshalls of the same period. And the current Marshall stuff is made with really crappy iron. So I would suggest, if you have the budget, go ahead and preventatively upgrade the power and output transformer in most current production Marshall reissues, because the stuff they sell is garbage. It's a matter of when, not if, it will fail. But you don't have to do it preventatively. You can wait. I'm not a big fan of thermal fuses, but they do exist. James Bless fitted a new set of JJs to his AC15C2. Sounds glorious. Good. Yeah, I mean, those amps are really hamstrung by the stock tubes, and it only takes a set of JJs for them to fulfill their promise. The difference between great tubes and JJs is pretty small. The difference between JJs and tubes which aren't great is pretty substantial. Cheese in the house. Hey, Colby Jack. Hey, Dustin. Let's see. Dustin just had some birria. Might do that tomorrow. Sounds good to me. Yeah, Golden Nug, I figure is a typo, yeah. You can do cathode bias quads of KT88s, but like I said, it's just a lot of money to spend to get a less output and less of the characteristics that the KT88 promises you, which is headroom and high output and clarity. Let's see, trying to find the next questions. Here we go. Doug Otto says, I have a home-built amp, and the damn thing just scrolled on me. Just a second. I see it on the screen, but I'm trying to look at where it is in the chat so that it lines up with more. Like, here's the lens, and now I'm looking at what Doug actually wrote on the chat there. Whereas if I look here, then I'm not looking at you guys. I'm trying to give the appearance that I'm actually making eye contact occasionally. I have a home-built amp based on the Champ circuit. With swapping the 22 nanofarad 6v6 coupling cap with the 1 nanofarad, give it a little more low end. No. If you go from 22 nanofarad to 1 nanofarad, you're going to decrease low end by a factor of about 20. If you want more low end in a Champ, you'd want to increase the coupling caps, but I don't think you'd get too much benefit from that because the Champ can't reproduce real low fundamentals because the output transformer, because the fixed bias class A, the cathode bias class A operation, tiny output transformer, and tiny little speakers typically. You can increase the amount of low end present, but most Champs have one 2.2 nanofarad cap for one of the cathode bias bypass caps. I think it's for the Champ and the Vibro Champ when it comes to the 60s amp and 70s amps. And you could increase that to a 4.7 or 10 microfarad, not nanofarad, from a 2.2 microfarad coupling bypass cap to like a 10 or 4.7 microfarad and get a little more low end out of it that you may not hear through the 8-inch speaker, but you'd hear if you plugged into an external speaker. But decreasing coupling caps decreases the amount of low end you have, if that's the only variable. Brad's got 9,889 subscribers, and he expects to hit 10K March 9th. So let's screw up Brad's plans. Come on, 200 of you are here. Go give Brad a like. Tell your friends to give Brad a like. Let's make him have a 10K party stream ahead of plan, and just to ruin all his best laid plans and throw off his expectations. We got him over 1K. We can get him over 10K. Come on, guys. You know what to do. Yeah, Victor, I do have experience with Aeon Effects pedals. In fact, the two that I have here, three actually. The one that you heard earlier was actually you heard both of them earlier. You heard the modified Klon I did, because I hated the sound of the Klon. And it's not Aeon's fault. Klons sound like a nasal. Klons don't sound as good as I tell you, but I fixed that. And then I did my version of a Zen Drive with some tweaks. So neither of these are what Aeon schematic builds you, but they're both using the boards, and the parts lists are quite good. If you build the Aeon kit correctly, you will get the original circuit. And this is my version of a Big Muff that I built. Again, using their board, my own circuit changes, because I'm perverse that way. I don't want to build what everyone else has. I want to do stuff that I want to do, because I can. But if you just wanted to learn how to build a kit, I think they're fantastic. The prices are great. The quality of the boards is really good. I will say, having ordered one of their foot switches, though, that the switches are not great. Don't buy their foot switch. It might have been the two that I have, but they each had slightly different problems. Let's see. What are my thoughts on early 70s Ampeg V4B amp heads? They're fantastic amps. The screen voltage can be too high. You need to knock that down a little bit for most tubes today with wall voltages. The filtering is insane, just this way you get insane filtering on the SVT. The boards are subject to the same issues that SVTs, where the boards flex over the decades, and solder joints need to be reflowed. But you do all that, you end up with a great sounding amp. Just keep the screen grid voltages just below the max rating for the 6L6s or whatever you have. And then you need 3 roadies to carry them, because they weigh a ton, but they sound great. Yeah, Brad agrees with me about champ and bass. You can increase it a little bit, but you won't hear it through the 8-inch speaker anyway. You just hear it flubby. It'll get indistinct. But even into a large 4x12 or whatever, that output transformer is still a limitation. So a little bit more, yes. If you want more than that, get a different amp. That's not what the champ's there for to do. But at the very beginning of this, when I was doing the pushed deluxe reverb sound, I had the pedal so that I've got a filter on the pedal that rolls off low end and brings up high end. Because I was playing this hollow body into this deluxe reverb, which has a big full low end, to get that overdrive, I was scooping out a lot of the lows. I think I probably didn't have much happening below 200 hertz. So bass is not all, the big full bass sound that you want in your bedroom is not always what you want musically or what you need. The difference between what you want and what you need can be very extreme when it comes to guitar sounds. Hey, Ken Smithson. The 65 twin reissues are usually pretty easy to deal with. Screen grids get too hot. Heater stuff gets too hot. Solder joints on pots and jacks. There's not too much that can go wrong with them, typically. I don't know what the deal is with yours, but I don't price per amp, I price per hour. If this amp takes me 2 hours, that's what you pay for. If the amp takes me 10 hours, that's what you pay for. And now if someone brings in an old amp that's going to take hours and hours or days to fix and it's worth $200, I'll tell them, no, don't waste your money. I won't just do the work and then give them a massive bill. He's talking about, okay, RC Fields talking about a 12-volt tube socket plug-in like a George Lynch or Legendary Tones gain preamp. It's going to draw more current, but it's only 300 milliamps. It's not worth worrying about. Most power transformers can provide that extra 300 milliamps of current. Won't be an issue. I've not tried any of those George Lynch or Legendary Tones gain preamps. It's much like the pedal thing. Why would I? If I want the amp to zig, I tell it to zig, and it fucking zigs. But most Marshall or other style amps that you're going to put that kind of thing in, they can handle the additional heater current without flinching. It's the one on the heel of the neck needs to be very slim and narrow. It's going to be most likely metric. So go get a set of Allen wrenches, a metric set, and you can probably get a set of metric and SAE. It's probably going to be 3 to 4 millimeters. Let's see. You want to be able to adjust the neck without removing it. Why? I mean, I've got 5 Fender-style guitars here. On each one of them, when it's time for me to adjust the truss rod, which is maybe June and late December, I back the tension off the strings, clamp a capo on the strings, take off the 4 screws, turn it a little bit this way or a little bit that way, depending on where I want the truss rod to go. I put it all back together. It's twice a year. Sometimes I go once a year, just minor tweaks. Once the neck, figures out that it's part of a guitar, no longer just a piece of tree. It's fine to have something which has that ability, like a Music Man. It's nice system on that thing. But, on a stable neck, it's not that necessary. Maybe on a Music Man with all that bird's eye, you do need to change the truss rod a lot. But I don't want to speculate. Thank you, Chase Surfer. Appreciate that. Thank you. I'd avoid Weber kits for everything, Alex. Not just the transformers, but the Weber kits are garbage. Everything in them is made of crap. You know that scene in The Jerk where they say, "This is shit and this is Shinola"? Watch that scene again. More people need to know that. And don't trust Whitey. And see a doctor and get rid of it. I should have telegraphed that I was making a jokey reference for that kind of stuff. I don't use emojis either. So, welcome to my brain. Let's see. Any more questions before we wrap this up? I need to scroll on down. I may not get to all the questions. I try to. Pope's Pod Studios, don't add a courtesy outlet to a 61 Gibson. Just get a power strip. Go get a $12 to $20 power strip from the hardware store. Plug your amp into it. Plug your pedals into it. Don't modify an amp to have a courtesy outlet. Let's see. I think we're going to be wrapping this up because my teeth is floating. Any super chats I've missed? I had a lot of people here today. I feel sorry. For everyone who's asked a question that I have not gotten to, I'm sorry. I do 3 hours of this, and I try to answer each question in the order they come in. But I can't always. Hey, Raphael. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, the audio on the Silverface test video. That's that Royer R10 hot rod. And it is, I put it a hand's width in front of the cone. So say this is the Royer mic, and this little square here is where the ribbon is, and here's the speaker. I just put it so that that's about kind of in the middle of the speaker, hands width out, and that's like the secret recipe. It's a cheat code. Every guitar amp I've done that with, it sounds like the guitar amp in the room with that, with one exception. On the Deluxe Reverb, because it's closer to the floor, I actually got a little more room of reflection than I'd like. But normally I put the Deluxe Reverb up on a different cab to get it away from the floor for that reason. That's why when I did the Super Reverb before that, I was miking the upper speaker, not the lower one. It sounds better if it's farther from the floor. Or I could have also just put a blanket on the floor, but I didn't want to get a blanket dirty. I think we're going to wrap it up here. I appreciate each and every one of you being here. To those whose questions I did not get to, I am sorry. You have to come back next time. You don't have to do a super chat to get your question answered. But in general, if you ask in the first 2 hours, you're more likely to get it answered because I get so far behind in these things. I never dreamed that there'd be this many people who are interested in this kind of thing. It means a lot to me to know that I'm not the only weirdo out there. So to all my fellow weirdos, thank you for spending Saturday with me and the duck, which we still have not named. We need to get on that. So you guys think of good names for Rubber Ducky here and put them down in the comments, and maybe we'll have a name for our little friend. See us.